Chapter 40-51. More than 1,000 years ago, news of Kenshin's death spread throughout the god world. Many factions, including the Nangong clan, as well as Kenshin's admirers, were shocked, incredulous, and regretful. But that was all. After all, ancient clans like the Nangong clan had only received his favor and were not his relative. But in these 1,000 years, the 5 god emperors ruled the 5 continents of the god world and enslaved hundreds of millions of people. Almost all of the general public and common people lived in an abyss of suffering, restricted in every way and extremely difficult. This was especially so for the various ancient clans. They had once been high and mighty rulers of all living things, but now they were reduced to obscure supporting roles. They could only live in seclusion and avoid the world. Their hearts were filled with anger and unwillingness, but there was nothing they could do. Many ancient clans had thought of rebelling and overthrowing the dark rule of the 5 god emperors. But they did not have the guts, much less the strength. If they acted rashly, they would definitely be destroyed by the 5 god emperors, and their fates would be tragic. Thus, they had been enduring silently, waiting for an opportunity. Until more than 20 years ago, news of Kenshin's rebirth and Kenshin's reappearance spread from the boundless heaven continent. Many ancient clans saw a glimmer of hope. Their spirits were lifted, and they were filled with hope and expectation. Thus, many ancient clans rushed to help Kenshin, hoping that Kenshin could escape the pursuit of many experts. Because they knew that Kenshin had a blood feud with the 5 god emperors and would fight the 5 god emperors to the death no matter what. Even if Kenshin was not strong enough and could not fight against the 5 god emperors. But as long as Kenshin lived, there was still hope. That secret rescue successfully helped Kenshin, allowing him to smoothly escape from the boundless heaven continent. While many ancient clans breathed a sigh of relief, they were also incomparably expectant and silently looking forward to Kenshin's early return. They were well aware that when Kenshin returned to the god world and the boundless heaven continent, it would be the beginning of revenge. Today, the Nangong family head received a report from a guard that Kenshin Ryushin had arrived. The moment he heard the news, the head of the Nangong family, who was meditating in the secret chamber, jumped up in excitement and couldn't help but wave his fist. Fortunately, he was the only one in the secret room, and no one saw him so agitated and lost his composure. Otherwise, the people of the Nangong clan would find it hard to believe that their family head, who had always been calm and composed, would have such a huge emotional fluctuation. "Senior Nangong, how have you been?" Looking at the smiling Nangong family head, Ji Tianxing also cupped his fists and returned the greeting with a smile. After that, the 7 elders of the Nangong clan also lined up in a row. They were all emotional and had smiles on their faces as they saluted and greeted him. "Kenshin, I haven't seen you in over 1,000 years, but you're even more impressive than before. Long Tian, you were once the #1 expert in the god realm, yet you met with such a tragic end. At that time, it could be said that the world was shaken, and millions of people cried for you. However, the heavens have eyes and have returned you to everyone, to the god realm. Kenshin, welcome back. Ha ha ha. Brother Kenshin, I haven't forgotten those 2 punches from back then. I still remember your teachings. When this world was shrouded in darkness, we, like many people, missed you. When everyone sank into darkness, numb and gave up on themselves, they saw light and hope, and that was you." The first few elders were still all right. They either saluted and greeted Ji Tianxing formally or tried to worm their way into being friends with him. The last elder to speak was the most emotional one. He was the youngest elder of the Nangong clan. He looked to be close to 40 years old, and deliberately kept a beard to pretend to be mature. His name was Nangong Ao. This guy's name was Ao, but his words and actions were not cold and arrogant at all. Instead, they were a little jumpy. Sometimes funny, sometimes deep, sometimes emotional, sometimes childish, sometimes exaggerated. In any case, his mental state wasn't normal. After he finished speaking, He even revealed an expression of admiration and opened his arms to give Ji Tianqing a hug. That expression and posture was as if he was embracing the sun and welcoming the light. Ji Tianqing could not help but laugh. He pointed at him and shook his head. He laughed and said, "You little brat, I haven't seen you for more than 1,000 years, and you're still so naughty. You're an elder now, you have to pay attention to your image." The elders nodded in agreement. One of them, an old man with a white beard, felt the same way. He quickly complained, "Long Tian, this little monkey is really a headache. We can't control him, and he doesn't listen to the master's words. From what I see, when you stay in the Yenshu cave, let him accompany you. You have to educate him on our behalf. Don't cause trouble all day and disturb everyone's peace." The white-bearded elder's words made the master of the Nangong clan and the few elders laugh. Even the guards around the formation plate snickered. Nangong Ao did not feel ashamed or embarrassed at all. Instead, he looked at the crowd with sympathy. He sighed with a heavy face, "Sigh, you old-fashioned people are too boring. Staying in the Yenshu cave all day, looking at the same people, and not adding a new face for a few years, what's the point? Our clan only has tens of thousands of people, and I'm familiar with everyone. I even know how many leg hairs these guards have, don't you feel bored?" When he said this, everyone had a strange expression. The dozens of guards all shuddered and subconsciously clamped their legs together, feeling an inexplicable chill. There were some guards who could not help but look at their legs. There were even some guards who started to recall and ponder. When did Nangong Ao see their leg hairs? Seeing that the atmosphere was a little strange and the topic was being led astray, the master of the Nangong clan coughed twice and pretended to be angry. He reprimanded, "Nangong Ao, don't think that I don't know what you're thinking. All these years, you purposely caused trouble and made mistakes. You just want me to punish you, to let you leave the Yenshu cave and have fun outside." Not only did Nangong Ao not quibble, he quickly nodded and said flatteringly, "Master, you are indeed wise and wise. Since the Patriarch is well aware of this, then I ask the Patriarch to." Without waiting for him to finish, the master of the Nangong clan waved his hand playfully and said, "You wish. Now that Kenshin is here, you have to treat and accompany him well. Don't think about going anywhere." Nangong Ao showed a disappointed look. However, he changed his mind and had an idea. Hence, a smile returned to his face and he nodded. He said, "Yes, master. I will definitely complete the task." Looking at his expression, everyone present could guess that he must be planning something again. After a while, everyone finished their greetings. The master of the Nangong clan and a few elders escorted Ji Tianqing into the light door and entered the Yenshu cave. Before leaving, the master of the Nangong clan did not forget to order the guards to keep it a secret and not to leak any information. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. Chapter 4052. The Nangong family head was not foolish. Since Kenshin came alone without any fanfare, there must be something going on. Moreover, they had to keep a low profile to prevent the news from being leaked. After all, Kenshin was still a wanted man. Once the news was leaked out, he would be besieged by a large group of experts. By then, not only would Yenshu's grotto heaven be surrounded, Kenshin's life would also be in danger. Keeping it a secret was of utmost importance. After entering Yenshu's grotto heaven, the group flew across the sky, across the mountains and rivers, towards the depths of the grotto heaven. Yenshu's grotto heaven was huge, with a radius of 800,000 miles. This grotto heaven, which could accommodate billions of living beings, only had about 10,000 people living in it. Almost 10,000 of them were the disciples and relatives of the Nangong family. The other few thousand were the servants and relatives of the Nangong family. Yenshu's grotto heaven was rich in divine power and resources, forming a world of its own. As long as the realm of gods was not destroyed, this grotto heaven, which was attached to the realm of gods, could exist forever. Even if the Nangong family lived in seclusion for hundreds of millions of years, it would not be a problem. The palaces of the Nangong family were built on the peak of the mountains in the depths of the grotto heaven. That was where the divine power was the most abundant. Ji Tianqing and the others flew across the sky unhurriedly, chatting about some casual topics along the way. Looking at the surrounding mountains and rivers, it was a beautiful scenery filled with spiritual energy. The atmosphere was even more joyous. After about 45 minutes, the group flew across hundreds of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers and arrived at the palaces in the depths of the grotto heaven. Even though they were still a few hundred miles away, they could see a stretch of towering mountains connected together. Each mountain peak was arranged in a picturesque manner. Ji Tianqing had been here before and stayed for half a month. Of course, he knew that there were 49 mountains. On each mountain peak there were a few palaces and mansions. Altogether, there should be more than 200 palaces and more than 300 mansions. Looking from afar, the palaces and mansions were dazzling, exquisite and dignified. There were teams of guards in bright armor guarding the entrance of each palace, as well as the left and right sides of each main road. Yenshu's grotto heaven had been sealed for many years and no outsiders had entered. However, the Nangong clan would not give up on basic precautions. Ji Tianqing had thought that after the Nangong clan had sealed themselves off from the world and lived in seclusion for hundreds of years, their clansmen must have become lazy and slack off. Even if he entered the palaces, most of the Nangong clan members would be cultivating in seclusion. However, he didn't expect that when the Nangong family head and elders escorted him to the plaza of the main peak, a large group of Nangong family members appeared around him. "Welcome back, Lord Kenshin." At least 300 people from the Nangong clan, all wearing luxurious clothes and exquisite accessories, surrounded the square. They were all in high spirits, and their emotions were stirred up. Their faces were filled with joy as they looked at Ji Tianqing with sparkling eyes. The dozen or so young girls at the front of the crowd were holding many trays filled with divine fruits and wine cups filled with bejeweled nectar. The leader of the group was a young woman. She wore an aqua-blue gauze dress. She had a noble and elegant temperament. Her expression and emotions seemed to be calmer, but her eyes were more complicated. Her eyes were as clear as a lake, and they contained an indescribable excitement and longing. She held a 5-colored haze cloak with embroidered dragon patterns in her hand. She looked at Ji Tianqing affectionately. It was obvious that when the Nangong family head brought the elders to the entrance of the cave to welcome Ji Tianqing, the news of Kenshin's return spread throughout the Yenshu cave. Those disciples who were cultivating in seclusion naturally didn't receive the news. They couldn't come out of seclusion in a short period of time. However, those disciples who weren't cultivating in seclusion and were just cultivating normally all moved out. The young disciples who admired and missed Kenshin even gathered at the main peak spontaneously and prepared this simple but passionate welcoming ceremony. As for the dozen or so young girls, the most elegant, dignified, noble and beautiful young woman was actually the one who was the most excited and the most surprised. It was just that she had great self-restraint and didn't lose her composure in front of everyone. Looking at the hundreds of Nangong family disciples who were cheering, Ji Tianqing felt a little emotional. He felt a tinge of warmth in his heart. Even if he had disappeared for more than 1,000 years, even if these young disciples didn't have a deep relationship with him. But after more than 1,000 years, these people could still remember him and treat him so warmly. He felt that he didn't waste his effort to help the Nangong family resolve the crisis. Everyone, it's been 1,000 years. When we meet again, everyone is still in their prime. It's really delightful. Thank you for your warm welcome. Long Tian can't thank you enough. Ji Tianqing looked at the crowd with a face full of smiles. He clasped his fists and thanked them. The hundreds of young disciples became even more excited when they saw his reaction. They waved their hands and shouted. The Nangong family head and a few elders looked at this scene with a smile. They didn't stop them, nor did they rush them. Then, the young woman in the aqua-blue gauze dress held the colorful haze and embroidered dragon cloak. She walked gracefully in front of Ji Tianqing. She had a faint smile on her face. Her red lips parted slightly. Her voice was calm and gentle as she said, "Long Tian, welcome back to the Yenshu cave. This cloak was embroidered by me back then. It's just that I didn't have the chance to give it to you. Now that you've returned safe and sound, please accept it." Although she tried her best to maintain her composure and make her tone sound even calmer. But if one listened carefully, one would notice that her voice was trembling. This was naturally because she was too excited and surprised to see Long Tian again. Moreover, he was right in front of her. At this moment there was only one thought in her mind. To be able to see Long Tian again in this life, the 1,000 years of waiting and longing was worth it. This was also God's favor to her, giving her another chance. After saying these words, she held the gorgeous, exquisite, and dreamlike cloak in both hands and handed it to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing looked at the beauty in front of him and was momentarily speechless. His heart was filled with mixed feelings, and he didn't know what to say. Of course, he knew that this woman was the princess of the Nangong family, the apple of the Nangong family head's eye, Nangong Nihuang. He also knew how much Nangong Nihuang admired and even worshipped him back then, and Nangong Nihuang's feelings for him were well known to the Nangong family. Back then, when he rejected that seemingly logical marriage, he thought that he had broken Nangong Nihuang's heart and made Nangong Nihuang feel very embarrassed. More than 1,000 years had passed, and Nangong Nihuang should have long forgotten about him. She shouldn't have any feelings for him to speak of. But he didn't expect that when they met again, Nangong Nihuang was no different from back then. Whether it was the way she looked at him or the way she spoke, it was exactly the same as back then. As for Nangong Nihuang's thoughts and feelings, he was afraid that they were still unwavering. Chapter 40-53. Although Nangong Nihuang was a very outstanding woman and could be said to be one in a million, she was intelligent, kind, strong and independent, and had the strength of the 4th level of the Divine King realm. However, Ji Tianqing did not have any feelings for her and only saw her as a friend. Because of this, he had rejected the proposal of the Nangong family head back then. And now, Nangong Nihuang was giving away the cloak that she had spent many years refining and embroidering in front of everyone. Everyone was well aware of what this meant. Therefore, Ji Tianqing was a little hesitant. If he did not accept this gift, Nangong Nihuang would definitely be embarrassed in front of everyone and the Nangong family head would lose face. Even if no one would argue with Ji Tianqing, he did not want to hurt Nangong Nihuang like this. However, if he accepted this gift, he was worried that Nangong Nihuang and the others would misunderstand and cause more trouble and entanglement in the future. Just as Ji Tianqing was hesitating, Nangong Nihuang looked at him and secretly transmitted her voice. "Long Tian, you have already rejected me once back then. Are you going to reject me again today? Don't think too much and don't have any psychological burden. This is just a small token of my appreciation. Welcome to Yenshu Cave Heaven again. After all, we are still friends, aren't we?" Since Nangong Nihuang had said so, Ji Tianqing had no reason to reject her. He nodded to her and reached out to take the cloak. The hundreds of people around them were watching them. When Ji Tianqing hesitated, everyone was a little nervous and worried for Nangong Nihuang. When the crowd saw Ji Tianqing nodding and taking the cloak with a smile, everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief and then burst into a burst of surprised cheers. It seemed to them that this meant that Kenshin had accepted Nangong Nihuang's feelings. Nangong Nihuang's unwavering feelings and thousands of years of waiting had finally been reciprocated. Everyone was gratified and happy for her. After all, these hundreds of people were the disciples of the Nangong family. They knew best how lonely and sad Nangong Nihuang had been for more than 1,000 years. After Ji Tianqing received the cloak, he did not wear it immediately. Instead, he stored it in his spatial ring. Nangong Nihuang's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment and regret, but she didn't show any unusual expression and still had a smile on her pretty face. In fact, for the past 1,000 years, she had fantasized countless times that one day Kenshin would come back from the dead and return to Yenshu's cave to look for her. The next time she saw Kenshin, she would definitely put this cloak on Kenshin with her own hand. That was a cloak that she had painstakingly weaved with 100 years of effort and countless precious materials. She believed that only a great, legendary genius like Kenshin was worthy of that cloak. When Kenshin put on that cloak, he would definitely be the most dazzling, most handsome man in the world. Unfortunately, her dream could not be realized for the time being. The crowd clamored in the square for a while. Then, Nangong family head, Nangong Nihuang, and several elders escorted Ji Tianxing into the main hall. The main hall was called the Great Light Hall. It was where the top guests were received and where important military matters were discussed. After the Nangong family closed the cave, the Great Light Hall had not been used for more than 200 years. And today, in order to welcome Ji Tianxing's arrival, the Nangong family head opened the Great Light Hall. There were already guards and maids who had tidied up the hall, making it clean and spotless. The dazzling Great Hall of Light was brightly lit, giving off a magnificent and majestic appearance. The Nangong family head sat at the head of the table, with Nangong Nihuang by his side. Ji Tianxing sat at the head of the table on the left, with Nangong Ao sitting next to him. The other elders sat on the right. After everyone was seated, there were young maids who served all kinds of divine fruits, divine tea, pastries, and wine. Both sides exchanged a few simple greetings before they got to the main topic. They talked about Ji Tianxing's intentions and plans. In order not to leak the secret, the Nangong family head dismissed all the guards and maids. He stared at Ji Tianxing with a calm expression and asked in a low voice, "Long Tian, why did you come to the Yenshu cave alone this time? Looking at your current aura and state, you are many times stronger than when you left the God world. You should have recovered to your peak state, right?" Nangong Nihuang and several elders stared at Ji Tianxing with expectant eyes. Everyone was guessing in their hearts that the sword god had most likely returned to his peak to take revenge. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and explained, "My strength has already recovered to the peak of the God King realm, and I have made a breakthrough compared to before. After returning to the God world, I plan to recuperate in the Yenshu cave for a few months. In the past few years, I have been traversing the void, searching for the major galaxies. To be honest, the major galaxies outside the God world are all under the control of the 5 God Emperors. The billions of creatures of different races in those star fields had all become the slaves of the 5 great God Emperors. They worked day and night for the 5 great God Emperors, collecting resources endlessly. Although I have not fought with the real bodies of the 5 God Emperors, when I passed by those galaxies, I killed the puppet masters set up by the 5 God Emperors, making it difficult for them to control those galaxies. In addition, there were a few avatars of the God Emperors who came to kill me, but I destroyed them all." Ji Tianxing roughly recounted what had happened in the past few years. When everyone heard this, they clicked their tongues in wonder. Their spirits were lifted, and they were filled with excitement and anticipation. Especially the elders, who exclaimed and whispered in each other's ears, "I see. No wonder the 5 God Emperors have not shown themselves in the God world for the past 1,000 years. The ambition of the 5 God Emperors is huge, and they are plotting far ahead. Fortunately, Kenshin did not fall, or else who could defeat the 5 God Emperors? I'm afraid that in the end, all living things in this world will be enslaved by the 5 God Emperors. Long Tian's strength is stronger than before? Is he going to surpass the Divine King realm and become the 6th God Emperor? What's so strange about that? If those 5 guys can become God Emperors, why can't Kenshin? I still believe that if there is a 6th God Emperor in this world, it will be Kenshin. Since Long Tian can destroy the avatars of the 5 God Emperors, That means his strength is not far from the God Emperor realm. Patriarch Nangong and the elders were excited, focusing on the difference in strength between Ji Tianqing and the 5 God Emperors. Only Nangong Nihuang's expression changed slightly, looking at Ji Tianqing worriedly, and asked, "Long Tian, are you injured? Is it serious?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and smiled. "Don't worry, it's just a minor injury. I just used too much energy and need some time to recuperate. When I returned to the God world, the first thing I did was to come to Yenshu Grotto Heaven. First, to recuperate, second, to use this place as a base to plan an earth-shattering plan. Just as you guessed, I want to fulfill my promise. When I return to the God world, I want to change the world." Chapter 40-54. Those sitting in the Great Hall of Light were all smart people. Even though Ji Tianqing did not say it clearly, he only mentioned the earth-shattering plan and the change of the day. Everyone immediately understood what he meant. They were all excited and their eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation. As for Nangong Nihuang, she was more attentive than the rest. After guessing Ji Tianqing's plan and purpose, she also noticed another detail. Ji Tianqing wanted to use the Yenshu cave as his base. Didn't this mean that he trusted the Nangong clan very much and had no doubts? Moreover, he would stay in the Yenshu cave for a long time and would not leave anytime soon. This was, of course, the best news for Nangong Nihuang. She looked around and saw that her father and a few elders had no objections. No one objected either. Therefore, she said to Ji Tianqing, "Ji Tianqing, thank you for trusting the Nangong clan. Don't worry, we will definitely support you and fully cooperate with you to carry out your plan." The Nangong clan master and a few elders reacted and quickly nodded in agreement. They all expressed their opinions. "Long Tian, the Nangong clan will always be your ally and staunch supporter. We believe that you must be fully prepared for this decision. Since you trust the Nangong clan so much, how can we let you down? Long Tian, with your reputation, as long as you raise your arm and call for help, there will definitely be a swarm of followers. As for the change of the day, we have to seriously consider it and discuss it carefully. You should first recuperate from your injuries." Overall, everyone still agreed and supported what Ji Tianqing wanted to do. Especially the Nangong clan master's attitude, which determined the choice of the entire Nangong clan. Seeing that no one objected or dissuaded him, Ji Tianqing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Previously, he was still worried that the Nangong clan had been suppressed for thousands of years and had long been disheartened and did not dare to resist. Now, it seemed that the Azura God Emperor's oppression of the Nangong clan for thousands of years did not make the Nangong clan yield. Instead, it aroused the Nangong clan's desire to resist. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. Everyone chatted with Ji Tianqing for more than an hour, asking him about his experiences over the years and the truth behind his fake death. No one was in a hurry to ask about the future plans to rebel against the Azura God Emperor. 2 hours later, everyone finished chatting. At this time, Nangong family head once again warned everyone not to leak the news of Kenshin's return. Patriarch Nangong originally wanted to personally arrange Ji Tianqing's residence, but Nangong Nihuang and Nangong Ao volunteered to be responsible for arranging Ji Tianqing's residence and daily life. The Nangong family patriarch and the other elders were happy to see this happen. They also knew that among the young disciples of the Nangong clan, only Nangong Ao and Nangong Nihuang were closest to Ji Tianqing. Thus, everyone stood up and bowed. Ji Tianqing took Nangong Ao and Nangong Nihuang away from the Light Palace. After leaving the Light Palace, the three walked side by side on the square. There were nearly 1,000 Nangong clansmen gathered around. When they saw Ji Tianqing come out, they all surrounded him, greeted him, and asked about his well-being to express their welcome. Seeing that everyone was so enthusiastic, if Ji Tianqing had to deal with them one by one, it would take him half a day. Nangong Ao and Nangong Nihuang hurriedly helped him out, and with a few words, they sent everyone away and made a path for him. The three quickly left and came to the back of the Light Palace. Nangong Nihuang originally wanted to arrange for Ji Tianxing to stay in the Star Origin Palace. This palace was magnificent enough, and had always been used to entertain distinguished guests. Moreover, the Star Origin Palace was very close to the Light Palace, and not far from Nangong Nihuang's residence. There was only one palace in between. She even wanted to transfer the guards and maids in her palace to serve Ji Tianxing. But before Ji Tianxing could express his opinion, Nangong Ao waved his hand and vetoed this proposal. Nihuang, if it were any other distinguished guest, it would make sense for you to arrange for him to stay in the Star Origin Palace. But Long Tian is different. There are so many disciples of our Nangong clan who admire and worship him very much. Everyone can guess that he will most likely stay in the Star Origin Palace. At that time, there will be people going to the Star Origin Palace to visit him every day. Wouldn't that be very noisy? He can't refuse. He can't hurt everyone's enthusiasm and face. But this will disturb his recuperation. Nangong Nihuang also felt that what he said was reasonable, so she nodded and said, I didn't consider it carefully. Ninth Elder, where should we arrange for Long Tian? Nangong Ao revealed a playful smile, lowered his voice and said, I live on the Flying Cloud Peak, which is far away from the Light Palace. Usually, there are very few people who disturb me. Let Long Tian live on the Flying Cloud Peak. There happens to be an elegant and clean house there. I'll send someone to clean it up. As for the guards and maids, you can arrange for them. Nangong Nihuang thought that it made sense. The ninth elder was always causing trouble, and also liked to play tricks and bully the young disciples of the clan. Therefore, in the past few hundred years, very few people dared to go to the Flying Cloud Peak, for fear of encountering Nangong Ao. In addition, Nangong Nihuang could also see that Nangong Ao's arrangement was somewhat selfish. He could be closer to Long Tian. But this was understandable. Nangong Nihuang didn't mind. As long as no one disturbed Ji Tianxing and allowed him to recuperate in peace, it was fine. The two reached a consensus and rushed to the Flying Cloud Peak with Ji Tianxing. After arriving at the Flying Cloud Peak, Nangong Ao ordered more than 20 guards and maids in his palace to clean up the house. Nangong Nihuang sent out a message, summoning the guards and maids who served her to gather at the Flying Cloud Peak. In less than an hour, this matter was done. Next, Ji Tianxing lived in the house, and the 12 guards and 8 maids were arranged to perform their duties. Nangong Nihuang saw that things were arranged properly, and said to Ji Tianxing, Long Tian, rest for half a day. Tonight, Father will hold a grand banquet to welcome you. Our Yenshu cave has not held such a grand event for many years. You should prepare a little. This was what Ji Tianxing had expected, and was not surprised. He nodded to show that he understood. Nangong Nihuang left, and only Ji Tianxing and Nangong Ao were left in the study. It was not until then that Nangong Ao winked at him and said, Long Tian, Nihuang has left. Now can you tell me the real purpose of coming to the Yenshu cave? Ji Tianxing was speechless. He glanced at him and said, My purpose, just now in the Great Hall of Light, wasn't it very clear? Nangong Ao patted him on the shoulder, with a don't pretend posture, and said with a chuckle, Okay, between us brothers, you don't have to hide. Tell me, are you touched by Nihuang's deep friendship? Ever since the news of your death spread, for more than 1,000 years, she has been depressed and sad. Her feelings for you are stronger than gold, higher than the sky, and deeper than the sea. Everyone in our clan knows. Such an infatuated beauty, don't let her down. Chapter 40-55. Ji Tianxing found it difficult to withstand Nangong Ao's words, and he was unable to answer. He could not find any words to refute and could only frown in silence. It was impossible to accept. If he said that he had no feelings for Nangong Nihuang, it would be impossible to accept her feelings. It would make her feel awkward and hurt her heart and self-esteem. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was silent, Nangong Ao thought that he hadn't made up his mind yet, and was still hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. Therefore, he advised him sincerely, "Brother, only through experiencing life and death can you see who truly cares about you and who truly loves you. I advise you to reconsider this matter. Don't hurt her a second time." Seeing that Nangong Ao's misunderstanding was getting deeper, Ji Tianxing could only explain, "Of course I don't want to hurt Ni Huang, but I really can't accept her feelings. Actually, I didn't come to Yenshu Grotto Heaven alone this time. I brought my family and friends. I already have a wife and children." Nangong Ao, who was about to turn and leave, suddenly turned to look at him with an expression as if he had seen a ghost. "You? When did you get married? You even have children?" All along, Nangong Ao's impression and understanding of Kenshin was that he was a cold block of ice, an unromantic block of wood. It was as if Kenshin was obsessed with sword cultivation and had no interest in relationship. Even if Kenshin did not marry, Nangong Ao would not be surprised. But he did not expect that after not seeing him for more than 1,000 years, Kenshin's character had changed. Not only did he get married, he even had children. Nangong Ao's eyes widened and his face was filled with disbelief. He stared straight at Ji Tianxing, as if he wanted to see through him. Seeing that he did not believe him, Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Don't look at me like that, I'm telling the truth." Nangong Ao frowned and thought for a while. He said, "Words are not proof. When you let me see your wife and children, I will believe you." Ji Tianxing said, "They are in seclusion to cultivate and heal. You will see them in the future if you have the chance." Since that was the case, Nangong Ao had no choice but to accept this fact. He thought for a moment and was suddenly enlightened. He smiled and said, "In the past, you were as cold as an iceberg. I thought you would never marry and use your sword as your companion. Since you've already broken your vows, you don't mind marrying another one. As long as you accept an Ai Huang, even if she can't be your wife, I believe she will be willing to be your concubine." Breaking the precepts? Ji Tianxing could only frown at this word, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. However, he didn't take it to heart and explained, "I already have 2 wives and a pair of children. We've gone through a lot of hardships and tribulations before our family can be reunited in harmony. I won't take any more concubines. That would hurt them and be unfair to them." This. Nangong Ao didn't quite agree with his idea. He smiled bitterly and said, "Why are you as stubborn as an Ai Huang?" Ji Tianxing only smiled and did not explain further. "If you want to be an Ai Huang's lobbyist, then forget it. If there's nothing else, then I'll prepare to go into seclusion to recuperate." Don't. Nangong Ao quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm just asking a few questions. I'm not here to be an Ai Huang's lobbyist. I have something important to ask you. Aren't you going to overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor and take over the boundless heaven continent? For such an earth-shattering event, you must be well prepared. If we start after your seclusion, we'll have to waste a few months. Why don't you tell me now, what do you need me to do, or prepare and plan in advance?" Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said with a smile, "It seems like you can't stay idle for even a day in Yenshu's cave. Asking me for a job is also to go out and have fun as soon as possible, right?" Hee. Nangong Ao grinned, which was considered a tacit admission. Ji Tianxing thought for a while and said, "I'll be in seclusion for about 3 months. During this time, help me investigate the details of those territorial masters in the boundless heaven continent. And those above the territorial masters, the divine king powerhouses left behind by the Azura God Emperor. You have to make a list, the more detailed the better." Nangong Ao's eyes suddenly lit up. He rubbed his hands excitedly and said, "A death list? This mission is very exciting, I like it. Don't worry, I'll do my best to make this list as soon as possible." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "All right, then do it as soon as possible." Nangong Ao thought for a while and asked again, I'm afraid it's impossible to overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor with just you and the power of our Nangong clan. There are still many ancient clans that are willing to listen and follow you. You have to contact them in advance, right? Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "Of course I have to do this, but not now, and I won't let you do it." Nangong Ao spread his hands and shrugged. "All right, my reputation and status are indeed not qualified. All right, you can go into seclusion without worry. I'll go find the master now and ask him to let me go out to carry out the mission." Seeing him turn and leave excitedly, Ji Tianqing quickly reminded him, the powerhouses under the Azura God Emperor might have received some news. So, you have to be careful when carrying out the mission. Be careful. Understood. Nangong Ao waved his hand and left the study room without looking back. Seeing his back disappear outside the garden, Ji Tianqing then retracted his gaze. After a while, he entered the secret chamber hidden deep underground and prepared to cultivate in seclusion. Swoosh. After entering the secret chamber, he took out the Jiutian Shiju Tower and entered the distorted space. The reason why he came to Yenshu Cave and decided to cultivate in seclusion for a few months was not to heal his injuries. In fact, his injuries were not serious. He had used up too much energy and was slowly recovering. It did not affect his combat power. The reason why he cultivated in seclusion for a few months was because the great battle on the Tian Su Star had benefited him greatly, and his realm had increased again. Now, he was very close to becoming a peak divine king. He wanted to cultivate in seclusion for a period of time before the shocking plan started. He wanted to break through to the peak divine king realm. Under the bloody flame sacred tree, Ji Tianqing scanned the surroundings with his divine consciousness and checked on everyone's condition. It was quiet under the tree. Everyone was sitting on the platform, focused on healing their injuries and cultivating in seclusion. Ji Tianqing raised his head and looked at the humongous bloody flame sacred tree. His eyes flashed with admiration and relief. In the battle on the Tian Su Star, hundreds of divine king powerhouses and countless Sir God powerhouses were killed. Naturally, the blood essence of those powerhouses were devoured by the bloody flame sacred tree. That battle was the one in which the bloody flame sacred tree had devoured the most energy in its history. Many years ago, it had already grown into an upper king sacred tree. And the battle on the Tian Su Star had allowed it to break through again. It was in the process of becoming a supreme king sacred tree. Now, the entire crown of the bloody flame sacred tree was surging with bloody flame and purple flame. Ji Tianqing believed that in a few years, it would become a supreme king sacred tree. At that time, this divine tree would become the fifth supreme grade divine item he possessed. Chapter 4056. Even the Shui Yen sacred tree was evolving and becoming stronger. How could Ji Tianqing stop his footsteps? Soon, he collected his thoughts and began to cultivate. Next, he planned to use 10 years to refine the 400 pieces of divine personas of the foreign tribes' divine kings. Even though the foreign tribes' divine kings were relatively weak, with only a few of them being upper divine kings and most of them being middle divine kings. But they had the advantage in numbers. Ji Tianqing believed that these 400 pieces of divine personas would be a great help to him in breaking through to the peak divine king realm. Swoosh! He held the 2 pieces of divine personas in both hands and used the engulfing divine power to refine them. It was quiet under the sacred tree. Only rays of divine light shone silently. As time passed, the power of the 2 pieces of divine personas turned into 5 colored streams and entered Ji Tianqing's body continuously. His power was slowly and weakly increasing, but his foundation was still very solid. Ji Tianqing was cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime and was not affected or disturbed at all. In the next few days, the Yenshu Grotto heaven was in a state of excitement and excitement. More and more disciples of the Nangong clan knew that Kenshin had returned and was recuperating in the Yenshu Grotto heaven. It was even to the extent that those young disciples who had seen Ji Tianxing with their own eyes were filled with pride and complacency. The sword god they saw was extremely handsome, mighty, and elegant. This caused those Nangong clan members who did not see Ji Tianxing to gather in groups of 3 to 5 and rush to the main peak. They gathered outside the Xingyuan palace and looked in anticipation, hoping to see the legendary Kenshin. Some of the women and older Nangong clan members could still suppress their excitement and waited outside the palace. However, some of the young disciples who were excited and hot-blooded did not have the patience to wait. When someone took the lead to break into the Xingyuan palace, more people followed suit and followed. Therefore, more than 2,000 Nangong clan members entered the Xingyuan palace and expressed their desire to visit Kenshin. Their main purpose was to witness Kenshin's glory with their own eyes. There were only a little more than 20 guards stationed in the Star Origin Palace. How could they stop more than 2,000 clansmen? Not to mention, the 2,000-plus people were all hot-blooded and emotional. They didn't listen to their advice at all. Even if they repeatedly stated that Kenshin was not in the Star Origin Palace, no one believed them. More than 2,000 people clamored and surrounded the Star Origin Palace. The scene was a little awkward and out of control. At the critical moment, Nangong Nihuang and several elders rushed over with many deacons. "What are you doing? Spread out. So many people have broken into the Star Origin Palace and are all crowded together. What kind of scandal is this? You lawless bastards, do you still have the family rules and ancestral teachings in your eyes?" A few elders scolded sternly, ordering the deacons to disperse the 2,000 clansmen. Due to the majesty of the several elders, many Nangong clan members were filled with fear and hurriedly withdrew from the Star Origin Palace. But without permission, they could only gather in the square outside the Divine Palace and didn't dare to disperse. At this time, Nangong Nihuang stepped into the sky and looked at the crowd with a cold expression. She said in a solemn tone, "My fellow clansmen, I understand your eagerness to see Kenshin, but I am very disappointed by your recklessness and impulsiveness. Fortunately, Kenshin doesn't live in the Star Origin Palace, and only we saw this farce. Think about it, if Kenshin really lived here, he would be in seclusion. He is currently recuperating in seclusion, yet you barged into the Divine Palace so rudely and recklessly. How rude is that? Is this how you treat our clan's distinguished guest and benefactor, your idol and role model? What do you want to show Kenshin? Show the impulsiveness and sloppiness of our clansmen? Or the ignorance and rudeness of our clansmen?" Nangong Nihuang's voice wasn't loud, and there was no anger on her face. She didn't curse. However, her words clearly entered everyone's ears, causing them to feel ashamed, regretful, and self-reproachful. Seeing the crowd's expression and reaction, Nangong Nihuang continued, "Today's matter ends here. I will plead for leniency on your behalf and ask the elders to exempt you from punishment. But I hope you will remember this lesson and think carefully before you do anything next time. If you can't even do such a small thing well, how can you make Kenshin believe that our Nangong clan can take on big responsibilities?" After she finished speaking, she waved her hand and signaled for the crowd to disperse. The more than 2,000 Nangong clan members turned and left as if they had been pardoned. In a short while, the square returned to peace and quiet. When the clansmen left the main peak and were on their way back to their residences, some of the smarter ones reacted and realized a problem. "Eldest mistress just said that we have to make Kenshin believe that our clan can take on big responsibilities? What does this mean? What kind of responsibilities? Could it be that Kenshin didn't come to Yenshu Cave to marry eldest mistress, but to carry out some mission? Take on big responsibilities? What kind of mission can be considered a big responsibility? Could it be that Kenshin wants to lead our clan to fight against the Azura God Emperor and seize control of the boundless heaven continent? It's very possible. Kenshin has a blood feud with the 5 God Emperors. If that's the case, then it's too shocking and exciting. Those meticulous and quick-witted Nangong clan members quickly guessed Nangong Nihuang's meaning. As the crowd conversed, the news quickly spread. In less than a day, the entire Yenshu cave knew about this. Suddenly, the Nangong clan fell into a state of excitement again. Everyone was discussing this matter. Of course, 60 to 70% of the Nangong clan members were looking forward to this event. But there were still 30 to 40% of the clansmen who were worried and anxious. In their opinion, even if Kenshin returned to his peak and recovered his strength, he would not be a match for the Azura God Emperor, let alone the 5 God Emperors. That would be seeking his own death. If the Nangong clan followed Kenshin and started this war, the Nangong clan would definitely be annihilated and destroyed. As a result, 2 completely different attitudes spread throughout Yenshu's cave. Even a few days later, many of the Nangong clan members were still arguing over this matter, and there were many differences. Not only the ordinary clansmen, but even some of the deacons and a few elders were affected and had changed their minds. The elders, Nangong Nihuang, and the head of the Nangong clan all saw the changes in the wind and public opinion, but they did not express their opinions. This was because the head of the Nangong clan had instructed Nangong Nihuang to reveal the clues in public and let the clansmen guess Kenshin's plan. The head of the Nangong clan knew that sooner or later, the clansmen would know about this news. More than 10,000 clansmen had to reach a consensus before they could obey orders and unite to support Kenshin. And it was not that easy to unite as one. They needed a certain amount of time to digest and accept this news. Chapter 40-57. More than 10,000 Nangong clan members were still debating. However, the Nangong clan master and a few elders did not express their opinions. Even Nangong Nihuang did not express her opinion in public. Looking at everyone's posture, it was as if the clan members were allowed to discuss this matter. However, as time passed, the impact of this news on the Nangong clan members became weaker and weaker. After discussing the same topic too many times, everyone would eventually feel tired and indifferent. Those who firmly supported Kenshin and believed that the Nangong clan would follow Kenshin to overthrow the Azura God Emperor's rule no longer waved their flags and shouted their battle cries with passion. Those who were full of worries and worried about the fate of the Nangong clan and thought that Kenshin was digging his own grave also gradually lost interest in arguing. They were even too lazy to persuade other clan members to give up supporting Kenshin. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The impact of this matter had completely faded, and no one in Yenshu's grotto heaven was discussing it anymore, let alone arguing about it. After all, everyone's opinions were not that important. In the end, it was still up to the clan master to decide. At this time, some rumors began to spread among the Nangong clan members. According to some deacons, Nangong Nihuang's good sister secretly revealed that Nangong Nihuang was very confident in Kenshin. No matter what Kenshin did, she would fully support him. In less than 2 days, a few deacons spread the news again. They heard from 2 elders that a few elders had a high opinion of Kenshin and were full of anticipation. The Nangong clan was once all-powerful and stood at the peak of the vast heaven mainland. How nostalgic and proud it was! After the Azura God Emperor ruled the vast heaven mainland, the Nangong clan's status plummeted to its current state. They were full of resentment and hatred and had endured for thousands of years. Now, they finally had a chance to take revenge and destroy the Azura God Emperor's rule. Even if they had to risk their lives, they would fight with all their might. Originally, the topic of Kenshin's revenge had already died down. After these few rumors spread, it immediately stirred up the topic again, causing countless clan members to discuss it. This time, the voices opposing the Nangong clan's support for the Sword God had decreased by more than half, becoming sporadic. Unknowingly, many people of the Nangong clan were influenced by the words of Nangong Nihuang and the elders, affecting their mentality and decisions. The Nangong clan members who supported the Kenshin became even more determined. Those who were hesitant and wanted to sit on the fence also began to support the Kenshin. As for those clansmen who opposed the decision, they began to hesitate or obey the decision of the patriarch. In short, no matter what the patriarch decided on this matter, the Nangong clan would be very peaceful internally, and there would definitely not be any division or conflict. On the other hand, Nangong Ao and 8th Elder brought 100 elite Divine Lord experts and already started taking action in the Boundless Heaven continent. Back then, Nangong Ao had gone to the Patriarch and told him that he had been entrusted by Kenshin to go out on a mission. Of course, the Patriarch of the Nangong family nodded in agreement, but he felt that Nangong Ao was not reliable, so he had to send another elder to accompany him. Furthermore, Nangong Ao's mission was very important, and he could not afford to make any mistakes or oversights. Therefore, the Patriarch of the Nangong family not only sent 8th Elder, but also sent nearly 100 Divine Lords. He even handed over the intelligence network that the Nangong clan had laid dormant for many years to Nangong Ao. With the intelligence network that was good at gathering information, Nangong Ao and 8th Elder were even more relaxed and could achieve twice the result with half the effort. In just a month's time, they had already investigated 20 domains and gathered information on 20 domain lords. However, at this speed, it would be very difficult to gather information on nearly 100 domain lords in 3 months. In order to speed up the progress, Nangong Ao decisively chose to split up. He and 8th Elder each brought 50 elite Divine Lords and rushed to the north and south of the continent respectively to gather information. When the Patriarch of the Nangong family heard this news, he was naturally worried about the safety of the 2 elders. However, he also knew that time was tight, and if he did not do this, he would not be able to complete the mission given by Kenshin. Therefore, he could only acquiesce. In the next 2 months, some undercurrents gradually appeared in the Boundless Heaven continent. There were many clues and rumors that spread across the continent. It seemed like the news of Kenshin's return was inadvertently leaked out by someone. The various ancient clans and many forces of Grotto Heavens and Blessed Lands were no longer quietly lying dormant and showed some signs of restlessness. Several trusted generals under the Azura God Emperor's command, the few controllers who guarded the Boundless Heaven continent, seemed to have also received some confidential information. No idea what orders they issued. Nearly 100 regions on the continent had powerhouses walking and mobilizing troops. Even though these things happened in secret and were carried out in a confidential state. But the Boundless Heaven continent that had been peaceful for many years, suddenly having these movements appear in a very concentrated manner still attracted the attention of people with intentions. The various major factions, sects, as well as many ancient clans, all became restless. Even the countless factions and divine king powerhouses all had their own thought. However, they had a premonition that a shocking storm was coming, and they might have the qualifications to get a share of the loot. Therefore, smart people would make arrangements and plans in advance to be in an active state, and not belatedly, when the situation changed, accepting certain results in a passive state. Ji Tianxing's 3-month deadline, the Nangong family head and several elders all knew about it. They were all waiting patiently and quietly carrying out some preparatory work in secret. But the Boundless Heaven continent was surging like a storm. The various factions could not hold back and started to take action in advance. Only 2.5 months had passed, and Yenshu Grotto Heaven welcomed a group of mysterious guests. The newcomers were 5 divine king powerhouses who hid their faces and concealed their track. They did not come together, but divided into 3 groups over 2 days to visit the Nangong family head one after another. When they arrived at the entrance of Yenshu Grotto Heaven, they did not reveal their true faces nor did they report their identities. They only took out a token each and let the guard commander pass it to the Nangong family head. When the Nangong family head saw those tokens, he guessed the identities of the 5 powerhouses. He could only let the guard commander pass and allow them to enter Yenshu Grotto Heaven. 2 days later, the 5 mysterious powerhouses gathered in the Great Light Hall and were received by the Nangong family head at the same time. There were only these 6 people in the hall. They were all upper divine kings and were the rulers of a region. Both parties did not talk nonsense and exchange conventional greetings. The atmosphere in the hall was also very solemn and oppressive. The few mysterious powerhouses' words were exceptionally short and surprisingly consistent. Nangong Buhua, we want to see him. The Nangong family head was not surprised by the few powerhouses' request. He even expected it. He shook his head expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "You came uninvited, I can't fulfill your request. The time is not ripe yet, please return first. Not long later, I will gather everyone on his behalf." One of the black-robed powerhouses with a hoarse voice snorted coldly and said, "Nangong Buhua, don't play dumb in front of me. Our coming today and coming the next time are 2 completely different matters." Chapter 40-58. Of the 6 experts in the hall, which one of them was not a sly old fox? Even if the black-robed elder did not say this, Master Nangong had already guessed their intentions. The 5 of them masked their faces and secretly met with Ji Tianxing. Most likely, they wanted to negotiate with Ji Tianxing to obtain more favorable conditions and benefit. It would be another matter if they followed Ji Tianxing's summons in the future. At least they would be in a passive position. Their status would be lower and they would have fewer bargaining chip. To put it simply, the forces represented by these 5 experts had the intention to support Ji Tianxing and help Ji Tianxing overthrow the Azura God Emperor's rule. However, their forces worked for Ji Tianxing and risked their lives. They must obtain sufficient benefits. Otherwise, who would be willing to risk being destroyed and follow him in his heaven-defying actions? Master Nangong could understand the feelings of these sly old foxes, but he could not make his own decision and negotiate with them on behalf of Ji Tianxing. There was no other way. Ji Tianxing was still recuperating in seclusion. He could not disturb him, and he could not let the 5 sly old foxes know. If the 5 of them knew that Ji Tianxing was injured and was still recuperating in seclusion, when they negotiated, Ji Tianxing would be in a more passive position and it would be very disadvantageous. Therefore, the Nangong family head decided that he had to brush these 5 fellows off and send them away as soon as possible. "What do you want to do? Why did you sneak into Yenshu's cave?" "I don't know and I don't want to know. I just want to tell you that the time is not right. Don't try to be clever and make a fool of yourself. Moreover, Kenshin is the only hope for us and the boundless heaven continent. If you have any ill intentions, it's better to dispel them as soon as possible. We have known each other for so many years. I can only remind you once. Please take care of yourselves." After he finished, Master Nangong waved his hand, indicating that he wanted to send the guests off. However, the 5 mysterious experts sat there motionlessly. They had no intention of leaving. The black-robed elder sneered again, "Nangong Buhua, we're all shameless people, and we can't do something as despicable as you to sell your daughter for glory. However, reality has proven that you've won and gained Kenshin's trust. Otherwise, he would not have chosen Yenshu Grotto Heaven and let you represent him. But don't forget, your Nangong clan has already boarded the ship, and there is no turning back. But we are different. If we join forces and refuse to cooperate, it will become a one-man show between the Kenshin and the Nangong clan. One could imagine what would happen to the Nangong clan when the time came. Therefore, you'd better help us build a bridge and facilitate this cooperation. Not only is this beneficial to us, but it is also to protect the legacy of the Nangong clan." Patriarch Nangong frowned and instinctively wanted to refute the black-robed elder. However, he immediately calmed down. He knew that the other party was deliberately provoking him. Thus, he did not make any excuses and said expressionlessly, "Half a month later, I will follow the Kenshin's wishes and invite all of you to participate in this grand event. So, everyone, please go back and prepare. Forgive me for not entertaining you. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand and shot out a golden light. Swoosh! The door of the great light hall opened, and sunlight shone in from outside. The 5 mysterious experts looked at each other, feeling angry and depressed. However, they could not do anything about Nangong Buhua's stubborn attitude. The 5 experts glared at Nangong Buhua and got up to leave. After a long while, the 5 mysterious experts left. At this moment, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders stepped into the great light hall. Nangong Nihuang's face was as cold as ice. She asked calmly, "Father, are the 5 clan leaders here to negotiate with the Kenshin?" Nangong Buhua nodded slightly and did not explain further. The elders revealed a playful smile, anger, and disdain as they started to discuss. "These old foxes are well informed, but they are too impatient. Don't be fooled by their usual cold and arrogant appearance, as if they are living in seclusion and do not care about worldly affairs. In fact, who doesn't want to restore their former glory and have a high status and power? They think that by negotiating in advance they can get more benefits? They are too naive. Kenshin is an expert, but he is not a schemer. I think they are just jealous that the Nangong clan is trusted and valued by the Kenshin. That is why they are so anxious to jump out." The middle-aged elders were all somewhat proud of themselves, and were quite critical of the 5 forces. Only a white-haired elder reported with a calm expression, "Patriarch, after 2 months of buffer, the opposition of the clansmen has weakened. Now, more than 80% of the clansmen have no objections. When the Kenshin comes out and announces the start of the operation, there should be no more objections." Nangong Buhua nodded and said calmly, "It's within my expectations. It's only right." The old man lowered his voice and asked, "Patriarch, those old foxes aren't wrong. The Kenshin chose Yenshu Cave as their base because they trust the Nangong clan. However, this also means that the Nangong clan is the Kenshin's staunchest ally. There is no way out. To be honest, no one can guarantee that the Kenshin will succeed. In fact, I think there is only a 10% chance. Have you really thought it through and made your choice?" Hearing this, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders stared at Nangong Buhua. There were no outsiders here. Everyone present was the person in charge of the Nangong clan. Their choice would determine the fate of the Nangong clan. Nangong Buhua smiled and said calmly, "I do not want to betray the Kenshin's trust, so I can only choose to accept it. When dealing with matters, the most taboo thing is to be indecisive. That is the path to death. Since I have chosen to board the Kenshin ship, I have to go all the way. Even if the odds are low, I will take it as a gamble. I have to have the courage to take it." After a pause, he said solemnly, "Most importantly, the Kenshin has already created a miracle. Why can't we trust him?" Hearing this, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders heaved a sigh of relief. Their expressions and eyes became firm. Previously, they were worried that the clan leader would hesitate and not be able to make up his mind. Since the clan leader had already made his decision and was firm, they did not say anything more. They just had to follow the plan and do what they thought was right. "Clan leader, we understand. Rest assured, clan leader. We will do our best, even if we have to sacrifice our lives. The Nangong clan has been dormant for 1,000 years, conserving our strength, just for today's battle." The elders expressed their opinions one after another. Their voices revealed their excitement and tenacity. Nangong Buhua nodded with satisfaction and said, "Long Tian will be out in half a month. You cannot slack off on what I have instructed you to do. You must complete it quickly. Since the news has been leaked, we must be prepared at all times, just in case." Chapter 40-59. There was a saying that a prophecy came true. It was very suitable to be used on Nangong Buhua. He had just reminded the elders to strengthen their defenses and put Yenshu's grotto on alert. In less than 2 days, Yenshu's grotto welcomed another group of uninvited guests. Previously, the 5 mysterious experts would take out their tokens and let the guard commander at the entrance of the grotto report to them. This group of uninvited guests was more than 1,000 people. They rushed to the entrance of the grotto with a murderous aura. Swoosh! 3 upper king-grade divine warships lined up in the sky. Hundreds of cannons poked out and aimed at the formation at the entrance of the grotto. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh! 50 divine king powerhouses led 900 divine lord realm experts as they flew out of the divine battleship. They lined up in the sky and surrounded the entrance of the grotto. They were all wearing armor and holding swords. Their bodies were surging with murderous aura. Although the number of guards at the entrance of Yenshu's grotto had doubled. Currently, there were 200 guards and 4 divine king realm guards leading them. However, they did not expect that before Kenshin's plan could even begin, there would be an army attacking Yenshu's grotto. Everyone was caught off guard. They were panicking and worried. Immediately, they pulled out their swords and sabers and gathered together. They stared at the surrounding people vigilantly. Even though the 4 guard commanders were afraid, they could not show their fear. They braced themselves and went forward to question the identity and purpose of the group. Who are you? Don't you know that this is Yenshu's grotto? This is the territory of the Nangong clan. Are you trying to start a war with the Nangong clan by pointing your weapons at us? If you don't want blood to flow like a river and the people to suffer, I advise you to leave immediately. Although the tone of the few guard commanders was strict, their aura was powerful. However, to the group, it sounded like they were trying to put up a strong front. After all, they were well aware of the origin of the other party. At this moment, among the 50 divine kings who stood at the front of the group, a few experts with powerful aura walked out. The leader was more than 10 feet tall. He wore a gold and silver chainmail, a phoenix-winged golden helmet and an ice-blue cloak. This person had a dignified appearance and an extremely powerful aura. Clearly, he was the leader of these 1,000 experts. A sword hung from his waist. His left hand was behind his back and his right hand was on the hilt of the sword. He looked at the several guard commanders with an expressionless face. I, Jin Shuang, have received orders to capture the criminal. No one is allowed to disobey, otherwise I will be punished for treason. Quickly report this to Nangong Buhua. Open up Yenshu's cave and welcome me inside. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. Even though the Nangong clan's guards were able to guess the origin of those people, they were unable to do so. But when they heard the 2 words Jin Shuang, they couldn't help but tremble, and a trace of fear flashed in their eyes. It couldn't be helped. Jin Shuang was the vice commander of the patrol envoy. She had the authority and responsibility to patrol the entire boundless heaven continent. Since Vice Commander Jin Shuang had personally come, there was no need to mention the 7 high-level God Kings standing behind him, all wearing silver armor. Those 7 God Kings were definitely all patrolling envoys. After all, everyone knew that there were 49 patrolling envoys under the Shura God Emperor. Every team of 7 patrolled the world in rotation, maintaining order and peace. Other than that, the remaining 42 God Kings were mostly the leaders of the various regions and the leaders of the various forces. In short, those who came were all strong enemies that could not be underestimated. The 4 captains of the Nangong clan made a decision after exchanging glances with each other. One of them secretly sent out a message to report the situation to Nangong Buhua. The other 3 guard commanders acted dumb and pestered Jin Shuang to stall for time. So it is Vice Commander Jin Shuang who has graced us with your presence. Please forgive us for not going out to meet you. Vice Commander Jin Shuang, our Nangong clan had already closed Yenshu's cave more than 200 years ago and no longer cared about worldly affairs. You said that you want to capture the criminal. This has nothing to do with our Nangong clan, right? Vice Commander Jin Shuang, there must be some misunderstanding. Please calm down. Our clan leader will definitely explain to you clearly. Kenshin was a criminal and the Shura God Emperor wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. This was something that everyone knew. Therefore, the Nangong clan would never admit that they were harboring the criminal and shielding Kenshin. How could Jin Shuang believe the three guards' words? He scoffed at this and sneered contemptuously, "None of you are qualified to speak to this king. Shut up." Such arrogance and disdain made the four guard commanders feel ashamed and angry. They were so angry that they gritted their teeth. However, they could not do anything and could only suppress their anger and stare at Jin Shuang angrily. Jin Shuang ignored them and patiently waited for Nangong Buhua to appear. In fact, he had already found out that Kenshin was in Yenshu's cave. That was why he gathered so many elite soldiers and rushed to Yenshu's cave. He was also prepared. Whether Nangong Buhua appeared or not, and whether Kenshin was still in Yenshu's cave, he would force his way in. At that time, he would give the Nangong clan a painful lesson to warn the rest of the ancient clans. As for Kenshin, it would be best if he could capture him. Even if he could not, it would not matter. Anyway, he was only here to test the reaction of Kenshin and the Nangong clan. The main force to deal with Kenshin was still gathering and deploying in secret. Unknowingly, 15 minutes had passed. Nangong Buhua had not appeared and Jin Shuang was getting impatient. He frowned and his aura became gloomier. The few patrol envoys behind him started to fan the flames and make sarcastic remarks. "Deputy Commander, you have been waiting here for so long. How could Nangong Buhua not show up? He is not giving you any face. Humph! How dare he make our commander Jin Shuang wait here for so long? That Nangong Buhua is too arrogant. Nangong Buhua is avoiding us. He is obviously guilty. Since Nangong Buhua is harboring the criminal, he should be punished as an accomplice. Deputy Commander, I am afraid that Nangong Buhua is packing up his belongings and preparing to escape. We cannot wait any longer. We must rush into Yenshu's grotto heaven and capture the criminal and Nangong Buhua." The few patrol envoys were egging Jin Shuang on to lead the group into Yenshu's grotto heaven. When the 900 Overseer gods heard this, their blood boiled and they were eager to give it a try. As for the Nangong clan's guards, they were filled with anger and complained in their hearts. If Jin Shuang really led the group into Yenshu's grotto heaven, they would be sacrificed first. However, the tone and expression of the patrol envoys were very sincere. It sounded like they were threatening them. However, with Jin Shuang's ruthless nature, it was very likely that he would do so. This caused the guards' hearts to be in a mess, and they felt extremely conflicted. They could not do anything. They could only hold their weapons tightly and prepare to fight to the death. Soon, another 15 minutes had passed. Jin Shuang's patience was finally exhausted. He waved his hand murderously and gave the order to attack. 7 inspectors, 42 godly kings, and 900 godly lord experts were all ready to launch an attack. Chapter 40-60. Not only were the deity kings and Sir gods ready to attack. Even the 3 deity warships in the sky had activated their formation. Their cannons were shining with divine light. In the next moment, the few hundred cannons were about to shoot out light pillars towards the entrance of Yenshu's cave. Without a doubt, there was no need for the deity kings and the 900 Sir gods to attack. Just the divine light cannons from the 3 deity warships were enough to kill the 200 Nangong clan guard. The divine light that covered the sky and the divine skill that could destroy the world was about to explode. The 200 Nangong clan guards and the 4 guard commanders were so frightened that they did not know what to do. Their palms were sweating as they held onto their weapons. However, at this critical moment, the formation at the entrance of the cave was activated. The teleportation door shone with a dazzling white light. Jin Shuang, you are brazenly leading your troops to besiege Yenshu's cave. You have no respect for me at all. Following the loud and majestic voice, a burly figure passed through the light door and appeared in the sky. It was a middle-aged man from the deity clan. He wore a blue brocade robe and a luxurious divine crown. He exuded a majestic aura. He was the master of the Nangong clan, Nangong Buhua. Following that, a few more figures flew out from the light door and followed him to the scene. These middle-aged and elderly deity clan were the elders of the Nangong clan. Seeing that the patriarch and the elders had arrived, the 200 guards heaved a sigh of relief, and their hanging hearts settled back into their stomachs. Jin Shuang and the rest of the deity kings looked at Nangong Buhua. They sized him up coldly and vigilantly. Nangong Buhua stood in the sky and confronted Jin Shuang. His aura was not weak at all. Jin Shuang, you are the deputy commander of the patrol under the God Emperor. Everyone respects the God Emperor, so they give you some face. I did not expect you to be so arrogant and unscrupulous. The Nangong clan has been living in seclusion for hundreds of years, and we have not done anything wrong. What right do you have to bring so many soldiers to Yenshu's cave? Do you think that the Nangong clan has been quiet for too long, and you want to use the Nangong clan to establish your authority? Or do you think that the Nangong clan is easy to bully? Before the Azura God Emperor ruled the vast heaven continent, the Nangong clan was the most powerful force on this continent. Nangong Buhua's majesty and his aura were no weaker than the peak deity kings. If the Jin Shuang, Nangong Buhua, they were peak deity kings. But the one who came was Jin Shuang, the weakest of the rulers. How could Nangong Buhua take him seriously? Nangong Buhua clan guards to Nangong Wang Buhua, Nangong. Nangong Buhua, how can you talk to the deputy commander like that? Old man Nangong, watch your words. God King. Deputy commander, Nangong Buhua used to bow and scrape, but he's become so arrogant today. He's acting recklessly. In this subordinate's opinion, he must have been harboring the criminal and thought that he had the criminal's support. That's why he dared to be so bold. That's right. Nangong Buhua has a rebellious heart. That's why he dares to offend the Lord. The inspectors echoed each other and accused Nangong Buhua of a crime. Jin Shuang sneered in his heart but pretended to be angry. He stared at Nangong Buhua and shouted, Nangong Buhua, I don't want to waste time with you. Let's be frank. You only have two choices. Hand over Kenshin and I'll pardon the Nangong clan. Or you step aside and I'll bring my men into Yenshu's cave and find Kenshin. Nangong Buhua was prepared for this. He pretended to be stunned and said in surprise, Sword God? Jin Shuang, what nonsense are you talking about? Are you confused? Kenshin is a legendary expert from 1,000 years ago. Wasn't he killed by the 5 God Emperor? Could it be that those who had already fallen could still come back to life? Jin Shuang, although I've offended you, you can't use such a ridiculous reason to take revenge on the Nangong clan. If you insist on hurting the Nangong clan, don't blame me for fighting back and defending the dignity of the Nangong clan with my life. Nangong Buhua said righteously. He even took out a divine sword and held it in his hand. He looked at Jin Shuang with murderous intent. Anyone who saw this scene would be convinced by his acting skills and would think that he had been wronged. However, Jin Shuang and the rest did not believe him. They all sneered. Nangong Buhua, stop pretending. Jin Shuang did not want to waste time with Nangong Buhua. He felt that Nangong Buhua must be up to something. Therefore, he gave an ultimatum. I'll give you one last chance. Either you hand over Kenshin and I'll forgive your crime. Or I'll capture Kenshin personally. The Nangong clan will be buried with him. After saying this, Jin Shuang pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at Nangong Buhua. He was emitting a murderous intent. 42 godly kings and 900 godly monarchs had also accumulated their strength to the peak and were ready to attack. As everyone mobilized their divine power, their aura rose. An invisible force field appeared and a violent hurricane blew. Everyone from the Nangong clan had their hearts in their mouths as they secretly wiped their sweat. No matter what, the Nangong clan was in a passive position. They were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. In the next moment, as long as Jin Shuang and the rest attacked, the Nangong clan would suffer heavy casualties. This battle was unavoidable. It was useless even if Nangong Buhua acted dumb. Since that was the case, he could only grit his teeth and make a decision. He sent a message to the 4 guard commanders and ordered, "What are you waiting for? Retreat to Yenshu's cave immediately. I'll cover you." The 4 guard commanders and 200 guards knew that Nangong Buhua was going to give up the formation plate and retreat to the cave to defend. Therefore, everyone turned around without hesitation. Like an arrow leaving the bow, they rushed towards the blazing white light door. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the blink of an eye, dozens of guards passed through the light door and escaped into Yenshu's cave. The 4 guard commanders were aware that they were not in a hurry to escape. Instead, they held their divine weapons tightly and helped the guards to cover the rear. Nangong Buhua and a few elders were the same. They formed a line of defense and blocked the guards behind. Although the guards were of lower status and could not be compared to the guard commanders and elders, they were still descendants of the Nangong clan. However, they were also descendants of the Nangong clan. Nangong Buhua naturally had to protect them. Seeing the guards escaping, Jin Shuang knew that Nangong Buhua was determined to resist. He did not waste any more time and gave the order to attack. Kill! Following his command, the 42 divine kings and 900 ser-gods released their divine power with all their might. They used their earth-shattering skills and charged towards the entrance of Yenshu's cave. The 3 divine warships also opened fire and shot out hundreds of divine power light pillars. Chapter 4061. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the earth-shattering noises, thousands of divine light blades and overwhelming wind, fire, and lightning rained down on the entrance of the grotto heaven. Hundreds of divine light pillars shot out by the 3 divine warships also hit the formation plate at the entrance. The first to bear the brunt of the attack was not the 100 guards who could not escape in time. Instead, it was Nangong Buhua, a few elders, and 4 commanders of the guards who were blocking the way. Even though everyone had already taken out various divine weapons and life-saving divine weapons and used all their defensive techniques to form a huge 5-colored light shield. However, a round of attacks from more than 900 experts and powerhouses shattered the 5-colored light barrier on the spot. Then, more than 500 divine light pillars drowned Nangong Buhua and the others. Boom, 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 boom. A series of loud booms reverberated between heaven and earth. The dazzling divine light covered a radius of tens of thousands of miles and destroyed many mountains and forests in the surroundings. Nangong Buhua successfully blocked the hundreds of divine light pillars with his strength of 9th Heaven Divine King and 4 Upper King level divine weapons. Not only was he unharmed, but he also protected dozens of guards. The elders were also powerful as they were all Upper Divine Kings. They successfully defended themselves against the attacks of the divine warships and were not injured. Moreover, they had extra strength to protect dozens of guards. But the 4 commanders of the guards could not even protect themselves. They were all injured by the divine warship. More than 30 of the guards who could not escape in time were severely injured. Their bodies were badly mutilated. More than 20 guards were unlucky. They were killed on the spot. Not even their bones were left. Dark red blood streaked across the sky and splashed onto the formation plate. The air was filled with the smell of blood. The divine kings and ser-gods under Jin Shuang's command were even more motivated. They roared and started the second round of attack. Nangong Buhua and a few elders gritted their teeth in anger. Killing intent surged from their bodies. But they were not blinded by hatred and anger. They did not rush out of the formation plate to counterattack. They continued to cast spells to cover the retreat of the remaining guards. From the looks of it, it would take at most 2 breaths for the remaining dozens of guards to return to Yenshu's cave. By then, Nangong Buhua and the rest would return to the Yenshu cave. As long as they closed the Heavenly Passage's entrance, they would be able to hold on for a very long time, leaving Jin Shuang and the others helpless. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang didn't care about her status anymore. She waved her sword with all her might. Nangong Buhua, don't even think about escaping. Give me your life. Jin Shuang shouted angrily. His strength at the peak of the 8th level of the Divine King realm burst out completely at this moment. He slashed out 6 sword lights at Nangong Buhua. If it was any other time, Nangong Buhua would not have taken him seriously and could easily defeat him. However, Nangong Buhua not only had to resist the siege of many experts, but he also had to divert his attention to cover the escape of the guards. When Jin Shuang waved her sword and attacked, he no longer had any extra strength to resist. Pung pung pung. With a series of muffled sounds, Nangong Buhua was sent flying by the sword light and smashed into the blazing white light gate. The blue brocade robe he was wearing was torn into rags by the sword light, making him look very miserable. Cough cough, Nangong Buhua was also injured. He coughed violently and blood flowed out of his nose and mouth. Now that he was injured, there was a gap in the defensive light shield. The first round of attacks from the 42 God Kings struck more than 30 guards, blasting them to smithereens. Fortunately, the remaining guards had escaped back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. Now, only Nangong Buhua, a few elders and 4 commanders of the guards were left on the formation board. Nangong Buhua was so angry that his face turned black. A smear of blood appeared in his eyes. He glared at Jin Shuang and the others and roared, "Jin Shuang, just you wait. Very soon I will make you pay with your blood." After saying this, he led the elders and the commanders of the guards to escape toward the blazing white light gate without hesitation. Jin Shuang and the 7 inspectors were filled with anxiety. They immediately shouted and joined hands to cast spells to attack the white light gate. They wanted to destroy the divine formation at the grotto heaven's entrance and stop Nangong Buhua and the others from escaping. They watched as divine spell shadows fell from the sky like a torrential flood. If Nangong Buhua and the others dodged, the blazing white light gate would be destroyed. However, if they did not dodge, the consequences would be obvious. At the moment of life and death, Nangong Buhua decisively gave the order and roared, "You all go first. I will cover you." As he roared, he used all his strength to activate 4 king-level upper divine artifacts to block above his head. He wanted to use his own strength to block the attacks of the many experts and cover the escape of the elders and the commanders of the guards. This scene caused the Nangong clan's elders and guard commanders to be incomparably moved. Their eyes even turned red. Even the divine kings and some divine monarchs under Jin Shuang admired Nangong Buhua. All this time, their superiors, such as the inspectors and the deputy commander, Jin Shuang, had been bossing them around and looking down on them. How could they count on these high and mighty nobles to protect them at the moment of life and death? They did not even dare to dream about it. At this moment, they even envied the people of the Nangong clan. With such a powerful and loyal patriarch, the Nangong clan must be very united, right? Bang bang bang! Boom boom boom! In the next moment, the overwhelming radiance of divine skills sent Nangong Buhua's 4 divine artifacts flying and drowned his figure. Amidst the dazzling multicolored light, he was blasted away, rolling and crashing into the distance. Amidst the series of loud noises, his muffled groans could be heard. There was a trail of blood at the edge of the disc. It was the blood that Nangong Buhua had just spat out. Although he was very powerful, second only to a peak divine king. However, no matter how powerful he was, he could not withstand the combined attacks of the 7 inspectors and Jin Shuang. He could not withstand the combined attacks of dozens of divine king experts. After being hit by the overwhelming radiance of divine skills, his injuries worsened and his strength decreased greatly. Fortunately, his sacrifice was worthwhile. The elders and the 4 commanders of the guards took the opportunity to pass through the blazing white light gate and escape back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. Now, only Nangong Buhua was still outside the grotto heaven. Jin Shuang and the 7 inspectors smiled maliciously and shouted loudly as they charged towards Nangong Buhua for the 3rd round of attacks. Let's go together and capture Nangong Buhua. He is alone and has no helpers. Quickly capture him. As long as we capture Nangong Buhua, the Nangong clan will have to surrender. Everyone, let's go together. We can't let him escape no matter what. With so many people attacking Nangong Buhua and him being severely injured, wouldn't it be easy to capture him? Everyone thought that Nangong Buhua would not be able to escape. Unexpectedly, just as everyone was approaching him, he suddenly took out an ancient linen banner and chanted a strange incantation. Swoosh! The ancient linen banner released a large cloud of gray fog and swallowed Nangong Buhua's figure. Chapter 4062. In less than an instant, Nangong Buhua had disappeared right in front of everyone's eyes. Not only did he disappear, but so did the linen banner. The only things left in the sky were Nangong Buhua's 2 divine weapons. There were originally 4 divine weapons, but before he escaped, he took back 2 of them. Jin Shuang, the 7 patrols, and many deity kings were stunned. Everyone stared at the empty sky and furrowed their brows. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Damn it! It seems like he was prepared to use that divine weapon to escape. Damn bastard! Even if he escapes back to Yenshu's grotto heaven, he can't escape death. The few patrols were filled with shame and anger as they gritted their teeth and cursed. Jin Shuang felt the same, but he could still maintain his calm and control. After a few moments of silence, he led everyone back to the entrance of the grotto heaven. This time, he did not waste any time. He pointed at the formation at the entrance and ordered, "I'll give you half a day to crack it or break through it." When Nangong Buhua took out the linen banner, the entrance to Yenshu's grotto heaven was closed. That linen banner of his definitely had a special effect, which was why it was able to help him escape. Jin Shuang and the 900 deity kings and Sir-gods did not have the ability to travel through space and enter Yenshu's grotto heaven. Even Ji Tianxing did not have this ability. Therefore, Jin Shuang and the rest could only crack the formation of Yenshu's grotto heaven or break through the formation to enter. Following his order, the 7 patrols and 42 deity kings immediately got busy. They carefully observed the formation at the entrance of the grotto heaven, thinking and deducing a way to crack it. The 900 Sir-gods were on standby. Jin Shuang frowned as he stared at the sky, thinking about his next move. In fact, he also knew that he was sent by the imperial preceptor to spy on the military situation. In fact, he and the other 900 people in the field might even become cannon fodder. However, he could not disobey the order, he could only follow it. Nangong Buhua's reaction seemed normal to him. If the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai did not have accurate information to prove that Kenshin was hiding in Yenshu's cave, he might have believed Nangong Buhua. As early as a few months ago, Kenshin had already escaped back to the realm of the gods, but he hid in the cave of Yenshu and did not show himself. Just as the God Emperor had sent back, Kenshin was heavily injured and was currently in seclusion to heal himself. If not, Nangong Buhua would not have tried his best to escape back to the cave of Yenshu to stall for time. This is my only chance to kill Kenshin. I have to rush into Yenshu's grotto heaven before he recovers and take him down. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang turned her head and glanced at the 900 Sir-gods. Her eyes flashed with worry. However, the Nangong clan is an ancient clan after all. They have a very deep foundation. If Nangong Buhua was determined to protect Kenshin, the 40 god kings and 900 god lords might not be able to defeat the Nangong clan. There is a high possibility that both sides will suffer great losses and we will all die in the cave of Yenshu. No, I have to think of a way to prevent an all-out war with the Nangong clan. It would be best if the Nangong clan could stand aside and watch us kill Kenshin. At this moment, Jin Shuang was deeply anxious and uneasy. She hated the fact that she had brought too few people with her. Even if she were to send a message to gather more domain masters and god kings, it would be too late. At the same time, in the depths of the cave of Yenshu, in the sky above the palaces, swoosh! A cloud of gray fog exploded in the sky and a blue figure appeared out of nowhere. The figure's clothes were ragged and his hair was disheveled. His entire body was covered in blood and he looked rather pathetic. He was the heavily injured Nangong Buhua. Not far away in the sky and the palaces below, a few groups of guards noticed him and greeted him in surprise. "Master, how did you get injured? Patriarch, are your injuries serious? Quickly send the master back to the secret room to heal." As they shouted, the guards wanted to support Nangong Buhua and send him back to his residence on the main peak. However, Nangong Buhua waved his hand and did not allow them to support him. He said with a hoarse voice, "My injuries are not serious. Don't be so flustered. Quickly inform Lady and a few elders to come to the Great Light Hall for a meeting." 2 groups of guards acknowledged the order and turned to carry out their mission. The other group of guards guarded Nangong Buhua and followed him to the main peak and entered the Great Light Hall. After sitting down on the main seat in the hall, Nangong Buhua took out 2 divine elixirs and consumed them to suppress his injuries. Then, he took out a new set of robes and jade crown. After shooting out a few rays of divine light, he changed into a new set of clothes. Although his face was a little pale and his mind was a little weak, at least he didn't look as miserable as before. Not long after, Nangong Nihuang walked into the hall quickly. Sensing that Nangong Buhua's aura was different, she asked worriedly, "Father, are you injured? How is your injury? Is it serious?" Nangong Buhua shook his head and comforted her. After waiting for a while, the elders arrived at the Great Light Hall. As soon as they met, Nangong Buhua asked, "Where are the guards? Are they okay?" The gray-haired great elder quickly reported, "Don't worry, Master. The 120 guards who survived have safely returned to Yenshu's cave. The 4 commanders and 120 guards have all suffered either light or heavy injuries. They have already returned to their respective residences and are circulating their martial arts to treat their injuries." Nangong Buhua was relieved and said in a serious tone, "Although I was prepared, I did not expect the Azura God Emperor's lackeys to come so quickly. Although we have all retreated and closed the entrance of the cave, with Jin Shuang and the others' strength and methods, they will be able to break the formation and enter Yenshu's cave within a day. At that time, we will only be able to fight them to a draw even if we use all our strength. I am afraid that after the battle, more than half of our people will be dead or injured." At this point, Nangong Buhua sighed heavily. The elders' hearts were heavy and they frowned anxiously. A few elders hurriedly suggested, "Master, it has been 2.5 months. Kenshin should be coming out soon, right? The situation is urgent. I am afraid that only Kenshin can resolve it and not let thousands of our people die. Master, why don't we knock on Kenshin's door now?" Before Nangong Buhua could say anything, Nangong Nihuang rejected the suggestion. "No. Kenshin is still in seclusion. The 3-month time limit is almost up. He must be at a critical juncture. How can he be disturbed? If he is unable to recover or his strength is affected, won't we be sinners?" The elders frowned and wanted to refute. Nangong Nihuang continued, "What's more, the Nangong clan has decided to follow Kenshin and help him with all our strength. It is not just words. We must show real action. Today Jin Shuang came. We have not started the battle yet and we want to awaken Kenshin to deal with him. If we meet Qi Yan, Meng Shuai, and the Imperial Tutor in the future, won't Kenshin have to deal with them? What else do we have to do?" Chapter 4063. Nangong Nihuang's words stunned the elders. Although her words were simple and straightforward, there was no reason behind it. However, it was this simple logic that was enlightening to the apathetic, causing the elders to feel ashamed. The atmosphere in the hall was a little awkward. The elders looked at each other and did not know what to say. Finally, Nangong Buhua made up his mind and spoke. Ni Huang is right. Since we, the Nangong clan, are trusted and valued by Kenshin, we must not let him down. When encountering difficulties and dangers, we should first think of how to solve them. We should not let Kenshin solve everything while we hide behind to ensure our safety. I believe that Kenshin has the ability to solve it. But if that is the case, what is the meaning of our existence? What qualifications do we have to be trusted and entrusted with important tasks by Kenshin? These sincere and earnest words made the elders nod their heads in agreement. They no longer mentioned the matter of awakening the sword god. Nangong Buhua ordered again, immediately gather all the guards, young disciples and deacons of our clan. Enter a state of battle and protect Yenshu Grotto Heaven. If we protect Yenshu Grotto Heaven, we will be able to buy more time for Kenshin. Even if there is more blood and sacrifice, we will not back down. Nangong Ni Huang and the elders acknowledged the order and quickly left the Great Light Hall to carry out their mission. Soon, they passed down Nangong Buhua's order. A loud and urgent horn sounded in Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Clan members gathered from all directions, and those who were cultivating were also awakened. In just an hour, tens of thousands of Nangong clan members were fully armed and gathered at the square of each mountain peak. Nangong Buhua sat in the Great Light Hall and commanded the 7 elders and dozens of deacons to give out a series of orders. The tens of thousands of Nangong clan members were divided into dozens of teams. Under the leadership of the elders and deacons, they rushed to different places in Yenshu Grotto Heaven to carry out different tasks. The first task was to activate the formation of Yenshu Grotto Heaven and inject divine power into each formation base to strengthen the defense. Only by doing so could the defensive power of the formation be strengthened and delay for a longer time. Just this mission alone had cost 49 teams and almost 6,000 Nangong tribesmen. Next, a few elders and a dozen deacons had to lead more than 3,000 clansmen to set up a few defensive formations with a circumference of 10,000 miles. This mission was personally presided over by Nangong Ni Huang, with the full cooperation of several elders. The defensive formation was to cover the mountains and protect the Nangong clan's residents. Once the defensive formation of Yenshu's cave was breached, Jin Shuang and close to 1,000 experts would charge in. At least there would be a second barrier to protect the Nangong clan. When the entire Nangong clan was mobilized and did their best to support and set up all kinds of great formations, the Nangong clan's grand formation had already been set up. At the entrance of Yenshu's cave, the 7 inspectors, 42 divine kings and 900 ser-gods under Jin Shuang's command were also in a state of bustle. Many divine kings joined forces and understood the mystery of Yenshu's heavenly cave's defensive formation. They began to research on how to break it. Although there was only one formation in Yenshu's fairyland, there were many people who studied the formation. Everyone had their own thoughts and opinions, and their attainments in the Tao of formations were also different. Hence, with the 7 inspectors and 42 divine kings added together, there were more than 30 different suggestions and ideas. Every suggestion sounded reasonable, and there seemed to be a need to put it into practice. However, time did not allow them to do so. Everyone had to quickly come up with an effective plan. A few inspectors and many domain lords argued incessantly. The weaker god-kings were basically unable to get a word in edgewise. As such, there were more than 10 suggestions and ideas that were eliminated. However, there were still more than 20 suggestions that needed to be filtered. When Jin Shuang saw this, she frowned and her face darkened. She showed an unhappy expression. When the 7 inspectors saw this, they knew that the deputy commander was unhappy. They did not waste any more time talking to the domain masters and divine kings, and directly eliminated their suggestions. Those domain masters and stronger divine kings were naturally full of grievances, but there was nothing they could do. Who asked the inspectors to have a higher status than them? Even so, the 7 inspectors held different opinions and still needed to be filtered. The 42 God Kings had all stepped aside, leaving only the 7 patrol envoys who were still arguing endlessly. Jin Shuang immediately became angry and scolded the 7 inspectors to their faces. The 7 of them immediately became obedient and agreed with a certain inspector's suggestion. In fact, everyone knew that the inspector's suggestion was the best plan. However, everyone had the intention to compete and show off. They were not willing to be outdone. Since Jin Shuang was angry, they did not dare to continue arguing. If they angered Jin Shuang, then the losses would outweigh the gains. Moreover, if they used the inspector's suggestion, even if there was a problem, they could not be blamed. Just like this, the 7 inspectors decided on the plan to break the array. They led the 42 divine kings and began to use their technique. As time passed, everyone threw themselves into the work of breaking the array. They were especially serious and worked hard. Only the 3 divine warships were idle and were sent away by Jin Shuang. They flew around the entrance of the grotto heaven, inspecting the situation within 100,000 li to prevent other powers from coming to reinforce the Nangong clan. Unknowingly, half a day passed. Although many divine kings and divine monarchs were busy in full swing and looked very serious. In fact, the task of breaking the array had just started not long ago. They were not even halfway done. After Jin Shuang observed carefully, he was so angry that he scolded the divine kings again. He was very clear that the more time they wasted, the more danger they would be in. However, the abilities of the 7 inspectors were limited. No matter how much he scolded them, it was useless. Helplessly, he could only join the ranks of breaking the array and personally cast a spell to break the array. In fact, Jin Shuang's worries were not without reason. Nangong Buhua also thought of sending a message to other powers to ask them to reinforce the Yenshu Grotto Heaven. However, after much consideration, he gave up on this plan. The Nangong clan did not have many allies. There were only 2 or 3 ancient clans and 2 sections. Not to mention the 2 sects, they did not have enough experts and masters. Even if they came, they would only be sending themselves to their death. As for the 2 or 3 ancient clans, among the 5 masked experts, 2 of them were the clan leaders of the ancient clans. Even if Nangong Buhua used his toes to think, he knew that they would definitely watch from the sidelines. They would take this opportunity to observe the Nangong clan's reaction and test the Kenshin's depth and details. After getting an answer, it would be easier for them to negotiate with the Kenshin in the future. They could not wait for such an opportunity. Why would they send reinforcements? Chapter 4064. No one could help the Nangong clan get through this crisis. In the end, they had to rely on themselves. Nangong Buhua gave up on asking for help. He simply treated his injuries and devoted himself to setting up the array. At the same time, he was also paying attention to Ji Tianxing's movements and the situation at the door of the secret chamber. Time passed by in torment. Very quickly, another half a day passed. Nangong Nihuang led many elders and Nangong clan members to build a defensive array with a radius of 10,000 miles. Although this was only an upper-grade king-level divine array, it could withstand the siege of Jin Shuang and the army for a short period of time. Immediately after, thousands of Nangong clan members cast spells to support the defensive array, and its power reached its peak. This made it increasingly difficult for Jin Shuang and thousands of experts to break the array. Jin Shuang's 1 day's time limit had passed, but only 1/3 of the array had been broken. Moreover, as time passed, the difficulty of breaking the array would increase. Because, while Jin Shuang's side was desperately trying to break the array, Nangong Nihuang and thousands of Nangong clan members were also desperately trying to repair the array. After a day, the sense of crisis and urgency brought by Jin Shuang and the army had lessened. This caused the morale of Jin Shuang's side to plummet, and the Nangong clan members also heaved a sigh of relief. Since the matter could not be solved in 1 day, then they would use 2 or 3 days to slowly solve it. Jin Shuang also contacted the domain masters of the surrounding domains, asking them to constantly monitor the movements of the surrounding forces. Those domain masters sent messages one after another, reporting the results of their investigations. The results showed that the ancient clans and top forces of the surrounding domains did not have any unusual movements, and were in a state of observation. This made Jin Shuang secretly relieved, and she was even less anxious. At the same time, Ji Tianxing had already cultivated in the distorted spacetime for 10 years and a few months. Within these 10 years, he had already refined 400 pieces of divine persona fragments and obtained immeasurable benefits. Firstly, his strength had increased. Now that he had reached the peak of the Divine King realm, he was stabilizing his realm after breaking through. Secondly, he had taken more than 100 divine Tao laws from the divine persona fragments and turned them into his own. Now, the number of divine Tao laws that he had mastered had successfully reached 1,200. In this world, there had never been a divine king who could grasp so many divine Tao laws like him. Without a doubt, his true combat strength had long since surpassed the God King realm and was infinitely close to the God Emperor realm. However, what surprised him was that, even if he returned to the realm of peak Divine King, he was also unable to sense the power of heavenly Tao, let alone condense a trace of Tao runes. Back when he was still Kenshin, he had already grasped a sliver of the heavenly law's power and had even formed the Taoist rhyme. Now that he had returned to his peak, with his previous cultivation experience, he should be able to smoothly grasp the power of the heavenly Tao. But the truth, how could it be like this? Ji Tianxing was puzzled. When he recalled that he had been neglected by the heavenly Tao and had never received any merit rewards, he felt a little depressed. Even though he was still in a state of cultivation, he was still thinking that he had to find out the reason in the future. The battle between the Nangong clan and the Jin Shuang army continued. Another day passed. Jin Shuang and the others had already completed half of their task of breaking the formation. It was obvious that the Nangong clan's efficiency of repairing the formation could not keep up. After all, repairing was not as simple as destroying. Moreover, the overall strength of the Nangong clan was not as good as the 900 Sir Gods led by Jin Shuang. Everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before the defense formation of the Yenshu Grotto was broken. Nangong Nihuang, a few elders, and dozens of deacons had finished their tasks and were conserving their energy, waiting for the arrival of the final battle. Nangong Buhua was also recuperating, trying his best to recover his strength. Everyone understood that in about 1 or 2 days, the bitter battle would arrive. Could the Nangong clan resolve this crisis, and be valued by Kenshin in the future and become the #1 hero? It all depended on the performance of the Nangong clan in this battle. Therefore, the atmosphere in the Yenshu Grotto became solemn, and the Nangong clan became unprecedentedly united. Just like that, 2 tense and depressing days passed. On the morning of the 5th day, there was a burst of cheers at the entrance of the Yenshu Grotto. Following a series of pung 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 sounds, the defense formation of the Yenshu Grotto was finally broken by Jin Shuang and the others. Thousands of divine lights lit up in the sky. Those were the veins of the defense formation, and they were collapsing one by one. The white light door at the entrance also appeared, but it was broken into pieces, turning into divine light fragments, and scattered between heaven and earth. An ugly, dark hole appeared. That was the opening of the defense formation, like a huge passageway, connecting the realm of gods and the Yenshu Grotto. The 7 inspectors and the many godly kings and godly lords cheered excitedly as they quickly retreated. Jin Shuang, however, was not happy. Her face was still gloomy, and there was a tinge of worry in her eyes. This was because the original plan to break the defense formation of the Yenshu Grotto in 1 day took a total of 4 days to complete. In addition, the Nangong clan's reaction was too calm, as if they had a card up their sleeve, and were not worried at all. Most importantly, these deity kings and ser-gods had been casting spells to break the defense formation for 4 days, and their strength had decreased tremendously. When everyone rushed into the Yenshu Grotto and fought with the Nangong clan, they would definitely be affected. However, things had already come to this point, and there was no use worrying and anxiety. They could only take one step at a time. After everyone had retreated, the 3 divine warships flew back and arranged themselves into a formation in the sky. Hundreds of cannons extended out and began to accumulate a vast amount of divine power and lit up with a blinding divine light. Boom! 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 In the next moment, hundreds of divine power light pillars burst out at the same time, and with the power to destroy everything, they violently blasted towards the opening. Divine light exploded in the field, and the light fragments scattered everywhere. The opening, which was originally 10 feet wide, suddenly expanded by more than 10 times, and became 100 feet wide. The veins of the formation around the opening were also severely damaged, and they all broke and collapsed. With such a huge opening in the defense formation, no matter how hard the Nangong clan tried to repair it, it would not be able to recover in a short period of time. At the same time, the 3 divine warships' simultaneous bombardment could prevent the Nangong clan from setting up an ambush on the other side of the opening. When the divine light in the sky dispersed, and the earth-shattering sound disappeared, Jin Shuang then gave the order to attack. Charge in, kill! As her voice fell, the 7 patrol led the deity kings, and rushed into the opening, and rushed into the Yenshu Grotto. After everyone had entered the Yenshu Grotto, Jin Shuang then followed in. Only 3 divine warships remained outside to guard the opening, and to assist Jin Shuang and the rest at any time. As for Jin Shuang, the deity kings and ser-gods, they rushed into the Yenshu Grotto with murderous intent, but when they looked around, they realized that the surroundings were empty. They originally thought that the Nangong clan would send a large number of troops to ambush them and attack them head-on. Now, it seemed that the Nangong clan did not intend to take the initiative to attack, and were determined to defend with all their might. Chapter 4065. Since the Nangong clan was not going to fight them head-on, Jin Shuang was naturally relieved. He led the 900 divine monarch and divine king experts as they rushed into the depths of the grotto heaven. Of course, he did not let his guard down. He was always on guard against the Nangong clan's schemes. Along the way, the 7 inspectors spread out to monitor the surrounding situation in case the Nangong clan launched a surprise attack. And reality proved that after flying for hundreds of thousands of miles and arriving at the Nangong clan's palaces, they did not encounter any surprise attacks or trouble. Looking from afar, between the mountain peaks, they could faintly see the silhouettes of palaces and residences. Jin Shuang waved his hand, indicating for everyone to slow down and spread out, slowly approaching the area. We advanced all the way and did not encounter any resistance from the Nangong clan. It seems that they have gathered here and are planning to hold their ground and resist stubbornly. Everyone, be careful. They did not set up any traps elsewhere, so they will definitely do something here. Jin Shuang held his divine sword and slowly flew towards the palaces. He transmitted his voice to remind everyone to be careful. The 7 inspectors and divine kings said they understood and obeyed, but they did not take it seriously. They did not encounter any resistance and thought that the Nangong clan was terrified and did not dare to fight them. As a matter of fact, some of the inspectors and god kings even imagined that the Nangong clan might hand over the sword god to protect themselves once they revealed their identities. If that was the case, they would have done a great service without any effort. But the reality was different from what they imagined. When Jin Shuang and the others approached the palaces, they were still 10,000 miles away. Between the mountains and rivers around the palace complex, divine light suddenly soared into the sky, forming a huge 5-colored light screen. Shwa! In the blink of an eye, a 5-colored light screen with a radius of 10,000 miles appeared, enveloping nearly 100 mountains. The five-colored light screen was like a canopy in the sky. As the array revolved, it flashed with a dazzling light and released a vigorous divine power fluctuation. Thus, the 10,000 miles of space within the light screen was tightly protected. Immediately after, thousands of Nangong clan members flew out from the various mountains, palaces and residences, lining up in the sky. They formed a formation in the sky and divided into hundreds of teams. They joined forces to cast spells to support the operation of the formation and increase its power. At the same time, their bodies were filled with terrifying killing intent as they glared at Jin Shuang and the others. The expressions of the 7 inspectors and the God Kings changed when they saw this. They frowned heavily. This, another great array? Oh my God! We won't have to spend a few more days to break this formation, right? Damn it! Why were the people of the Nangong clan so cowardly? Can't we have a good fight? You cowards! Do you only know how to hide in the formation and drag out an ignoble existence? Thinking back to the experience of breaking the array a few days ago, the 7 inspectors and the God Kings all had headache. They cursed angrily, wishing they could kill all of the Nangong clan members. Originally, they had used 4 days to break the formation, so they were already exhausted. It was not easy for them to enter Yenshu's cave heaven and fight with the Nangong clan. They did not expect to have to break the formation again. Many of them had a mental breakdown. However, the Nangong clan members in the 5-colored light barrier could not hear their shouts, so they did not react. However, Jin Shuang frowned and shouted at the Nangong clan members in the 5-colored light barrier, "Nangong Buhua, are you really going to be a coward? If you are still a person, show yourself. I want to have a good talk with you." There was no doubt about the outcome. The Nangong clan members in the 5-colored light barrier did not react, and Nangong Buhua did not show himself. Jin Shuang thought that Nangong Buhua was purposely avoiding him, but in fact, Nangong Buhua was healing himself. Nangong Nihuang, a few elders, and many deacons were busy deploying troops to increase the power of the defensive formation. Therefore, Jin Shuang shouted outside the formation for a while, but no one responded to him. Jin Shuang, who was ignored, could be said to have lost all face. She was ashamed and resentful. In his anger, he said ruthlessly, "Nangong Buhua, I gave you one last chance to live, but you avoided me. You want to play dead with me? Fine, I will fulfill your wish. Within a day, I will break through this turtle shell and kill you, you old turtle." Following his order, the 7 inspectors and 42 divine kings immediately spread out and observed the structure of the defensive formation. The 900 divine monarch experts also spread out and consciously formed a formation. Although everyone was unwilling to continue breaking the formation, they felt a headache just thinking about it. However, the deputy commander had suffered such humiliation, so they naturally had to listen to the order and break the formation as soon as possible to kill Nangong Buhua to vent their anger for the deputy commander. However, what they did not expect was that. Jin Shuang waved his hand again and asked in a low voice, "What are you doing?" "I am not talking about breaking the formation, I am talking about breaking it. Directly breaking it. Do you understand?" The 7 inspectors and 42 divine kings were stunned for a moment before reacting. Seeing Jin Shuang's anxious and murderous appearance, everyone felt guilty and fearful and subconsciously shrunk their necks. Then, everyone clenched their blades and changed into a new formation, waiting for Jin Shuang's order. Seeing everyone in a charging formation, Jin Shuang's expression eased a little. He waved his sword and ordered, "Everyone, listen to my order. Break this formation at all costs. In one day, I will kill my way into the Nangong clan's light palace." Roar! Roar roar! Kill! Kill kill kill! Charge! The 7 inspectors, 42 divine kings, and 900 divine monarchs were all fired up. They let out deafening roars and attacked with all their might. Even Jin Shuang waved his divine sword and roared as he attacked. Everyone unleashed their strongest divine power and unleashed their most terrifying divine technique. They unleashed a barrage of sword lights, wind, fire, and lightning that blotted out the sky. Bang! Bang bang bang! Boom boom boom! In the next moment, thousands of divine techniques landed on the five-colored light barrier, exploding with deafening sounds. Divine light fragments that covered the sky flew everywhere. The raging shockwave carried countless fragments of divine light as it spread out in all directions, destroying a few nearby mountain ranges. The light barrier that was thousands of miles wide also trembled, exploding with divine light. Seeing that the first round of attacks from Jin Shuang and the others were close to the limit of the formation's defense, the light barrier was about to crack. The thousands of Nangong clan members revealed shocked and worried expressions. Many of the Nangong clan members who had lower mental fortitude let out cries of surprise. Luckily, there were 3 elders and 20 deacons present. They quickly comforted everyone. Under their command, the thousands of Nangong clan members activated their divine power and poured it into the defensive formation. Thus, the defensive formation quickly dissolved the shockwaves and became as stable as a rock. Chapter 4066. Boom! Boom boom boom! Soon, Jin Shuang and the 900 godly kings and godly monarchs launched a second round of attack. Once again, divine techniques, wind, fire, and lightning filled the sky. Like a flood, they rained down on the 5-colored light barrier, creating earth-shattering explosions. The enormous sound waves spread for tens of thousands of miles before dissipating. The violent shock waves, wrapped in divine light fragments, swept across 80,000 miles. As a result, the mountains in this area collapsed one after another, and the mountain range also collapsed one after another, turning into a desolate ruin. Yellow sand filled the sky, covering the sun, causing everything within tens of thousands of miles to be blurry. The 5-colored light barrier once again withstood the fierce attack. It only trembled and shook violently, but no cracks appeared. The thousands of Nangong clan members finally let out a sigh of relief. Previously, they were worried that this hastily constructed array would not be able to withstand the attacks of Jin Shuang's army. But now, it seemed that the efforts of the young miss, the elders, and the deacons were not in vain. As time passed, Jin Shuang and the 900 godly kings and godly monarchs continued their attack. The loud rumbling noises did not stop, and the flashing divine light and devastating shock waves did not stop either. The 5-colored light barrier within 10,000 miles shook more and more violently. 4 hours later, the light barrier's power gradually decreased, and cracks began to appear under the attacks. However, the Nangong clan members desperately repaired the array, replenishing its power so that it could still hold on. 6 hours later, more and more cracks appeared on the formation, densely packed. No matter how hard the Nangong clan members tried, the speed of repairing the cracks could not keep up with the destruction of Jin Shuang's army. 12 hours later, half a day had passed. The cracks on the 5-colored light barrier had already turned into dozens of cracks. The long cracks were dozens of feet long, and the short ones were more than a foot wide. With so many cracks, many godly king experts could shrink their bodies and pass through them, entering the defensive array. But Jin Shuang and the 7 inspectors did not do so. It was too risky. Once they entered, they would be surrounded by thousands of Nangong clan members. It would be like catching a turtle in a jar. If Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others were hiding in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity, then they would be sending themselves to their death. The safest way was to wait for the army to break through the defensive formation before charging in together. Unknowingly, a day had passed just like that. Finally, the defensive formation was riddled with holes and was on the verge of collapse. At this time, Jin Shuang suddenly roared. Holding her sword with both hands, she descended from the sky and slashed at the defensive array that was on the verge of collapse. The inspectors, godly kings, and godly lords all made way as their gazes landed on him. Even the Nangong clansmen in the array looked at Jin Shuang, who was descending from the sky with deep worry and fear. "Ha!" Jin Shuang roared, holding the sword with both hands and slashing out 1,000-foot-long, dazzling divine sword light. With a loud boom, the giant sword slashed the 5-colored light shield and split it in half. God knows how many fragments of divine light were sent flying to both sides, creating a terrifying hurricane. More than half of the defensive formation had collapsed, but the power of the massive sword didn't diminish in the slightest as it struck the ground again. 1,000-foot-tall mountain peak was instantly turned into ruins. Over 100 Nangong clansmen were unable to dodge in time and were instantly turned into dust. Such a valiant and heroic scene filled many of the Nangong clan members with fear, and they subconsciously retreated. How could the 7 inspectors and the godly kings let go of such a chance to flatter him? Everyone showed an appropriate expression of worship, clapping and cheering excitedly. Jin Shuang stood in the air, the divine sword in his hand pointed to the ground, with an awe-inspiring stance. With this strike, most of the shame and anger in his heart had dissipated, and he felt much better. Looking at the collapsed array, the thousands of Nangong clansmen trembling in fear as they retreated as though they were facing a great enemy, he was filled with even more arrogance as he laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha ha, Nangong old thief, come out and die!" After laughing, he held the divine sword and led the godly kings and godly lords into the array, heading straight for the great light palace on the main peak. The thousands of Nangong clansmen were filled with fear and worry, but they weren't cowardly or timid. They retreated close to 100 miles and formed 2 lines of defense before they stopped retreating. Under the lead of the 3 elders and 20 deacons, they launched a brave counterattack. "Charge! Kill! Even if we die in battle, we can't lose face for the Nangong clan." Many hot-blooded young disciples let out stubborn roars. The 3 elders and more than 20 deacons took the lead and charged forward. They unleashed their divine arts with all their might, releasing a divine light that blotted out the sky and covered the sun. Pung pung pung. Boom boom boom. Kaboom. The 2 groups of people quickly overlapped as they fiercely clashed. The sky was filled with divine techniques as they clashed, creating a deafening explosion that shook the heavens and earth. The divine light covered the sky as the devastating shock waves shook the earth. Countless fragments of divine light danced in the air. Shouts of killing still reverberated in the heavens and earth. The mountains and forests below their feet, on the other hand, were already collapsing and splitting, turning into desolated ruins. Dust flew, blood splattered, and broken limbs flew in the air. The only thing left in this area was the scene of blood and fire. The most intense exchange of close combat brought about the most tragic battlefield. It was a ghastly sight. Both sides had only exchanged a few blows, but the Nangong clan had suffered heavy casualties and were constantly retreating. No matter if it was the 3 elders and 20 deacons, or the thousands of Nangong clan members, they were no match for Jin Shuang's army. Jin Shuang's side had only lost 30 Sir-gods, but the Nangong clan's casualties had already exceeded 100. If this continued, the thousands of Nangong clan members would be killed within 4 hours. At that time, more than half of Jin Shuang's army would survive. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang's army's morale soared as they charged even more bravely. The thousands of Nangong clan members were anxious as they thought to themselves, "Why haven't the family head and young miss acted yet?" At this moment, the great light palace on the main peak suddenly lit up with a few beams of divine light that shot into the sky as a roar came out. The long roar that pierced through metal and stone broke through the air, causing many mountains to tremble. Jin Shuang raised her head and saw a few divine king experts rushing over in the form of flowing light. The leader was Nangong Buhua, who wore a blue robe and a divine crown. "Old Nangong, you can't sit still after all?" Jin Shuang's lips curled into a cold smile as she mocked in a disdainful tone. However, Nangong Buhua and the 4 divine king experts did not help the Nangong clan members when they got close. They took out a few divine artifacts and attacked the back of Jin Shuang's army. Swoosh! swoosh swoosh. A total of 12 divine artifacts landed in the ruins and immediately shot into the sky, forming a huge barrier. Chapter 4067. Seeing the actions of Nangong Buhua and the others, Jin Shuang was clearly confused. The 7 inspectors, 42 godly kings, and many godly lords were also puzzled by this. Logically speaking, Nangong Buhua and the few divine king experts of the Nangong clan should have joined the battle. Why would they take out a divine weapon and set up a formation on the battlefield? Even if they wanted to set up a divine light barrier to block the attack of Jin Shuang's army, it should be between the two armies. Why would they set it up behind Jin Shuang's army? What was this? Of course, there were 2 or 3 inspectors who thought they had guessed Nangong Buhua's scheme and quickly shouted to remind everyone. Everyone be careful, this must be old Nangong's scheme. Don't be careless, don't fall into old Nangong's trap. The facts seemed to confirm their guesses. The 5-colored barrier extended in all directions and surrounded Jin Shuang's army. Seeing this, Jin Shuang immediately waved his sword and ordered, "Charge! Destroy them with all your strength and charge into the Light Palace." Jin Shuang was very calm and his goal was very clear. The divine light barrier could not harm them for the time being and could be ignored. If they wasted time and manpower to destroy the barrier, they would fall into Nangong Buhua's trap. The correct method was to charge forward and destroy the Nangong clan until they reached the Light Palace. The facts proved that Jin Shuang's method was very wise. He personally led the army under his command and defeated the Nangong clan members like a hot knife through butter, quickly advancing a few hundred miles. Only when Nangong Buhua and several elders stopped them did Jin Shuang and the experts under him stop their charge. The divine light barrier hundreds of miles behind them was still extending to both sides in the sky, but the speed was not fast enough. Not to mention whether the barrier could stop Jin Shuang and the others. Even if it could, the temporary barrier did not have much killing power. Jin Shuang looked at Nangong Buhua, who was hundreds of feet away, and sneered disdainfully, "Old Nangong, have you gone senile? I said I would charge into the Light Palace and cut off your head with my own hand. You didn't run for your life and didn't set up a defense in front of you, but set up a barrier behind us? Ha 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 ha. Looks like you've been scared out of your wits and are at a loss for what to do, right?" The other inspectors also laughed wildly, mocking Nangong Buhua. "Old bastard Nangong, if you know what's good for you, you'd better kneel down and admit defeat. The deputy commander might give you a decent death. Old thief Nangong, I'm afraid it's not enough to just kneel down and admit defeat. It's best if you let your beautiful daughter accompany our deputy commander. Ha 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 ha. The vice commander gave you a chance before, but you insisted on dying. Old Nangong, die obediently." Hearing such filthy words, many elders, deacons, and clansmen of the Nangong clan were unable to restrain their anger. Their blood and chi surged, and they wished they could fight Jin Shuang's army to the death. However, Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others were not angry. If one looked carefully, they would discover that their eyes were extremely calm and confident, and there was even a trace of mockery hidden in their eyes. The others did not see the problem, but Jin Shuang observed carefully and found some clues. His heart skipped a beat, and he had a bad premonition. "What's going on? I have already brought people here. The Nangong clan is in a critical situation, and they are on the verge of death. Why are they not panicking at all? No. There must be something wrong, could it be?" In an instant, Jin Shuang guessed a possibility. His pupils shrank, and a trace of worry flashed across his eyes. The facts once again confirmed his guess. Nangong Buhua held his head high, looked down at him with a dignified expression, and said in a sonorous voice, "Jin Shuang, haven't you always said that you want to see the Kenshin in person? Now you've got your wish." After speaking, he did not care about the reaction of Jin Shuang and the other inspectors, and turned to look in the direction of the Light Palace. Nangong Nihuang and the several elders also looked sideways at the main peak, a smile and expectant expression on their faces. At this moment, everyone was shocked and silent. Jin Shuang and the inspectors, god kings and divine lords under his command all had a look of astonishment, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. And everyone in the Nangong clan had a look of surprise and relief, and many people even cheered. Unknowingly, all the Nangong clan people had regarded Kenshin as their most reliable backer. And Jin Shuang and the god kings and divine lords under his command were filled with fear of Kenshin. Swoosh! At this moment, a white light lit up in the light palace, and soared into the sky. It was a handsome and valiant white figure. Although it was very far away and could not be seen clearly, it was still very blurry. But his extraordinary appearance, mysterious and dignified aura still made everyone's heart palpitate. Swoosh! The next moment, the white figure casually took a step forward, crossed the 8,000 miles of sky, and came to the battlefield. He stood in front of Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang, looking calmly at Jin Shuang with a faint smile on his lip. Everyone's eyes were gathered on him at this moment. Thousands of pairs of eyes stared at him, revealing all kinds of complicated expressions. He was the same as before. His robe was as white as snow, and his long hair fluttered in the wind. He was indescribably handsome, elegant, and mysterious. That's right, he was Ji Tianxing, who had just finished his secluded cultivation. After he had broken through to the peak of the God King stage, he had cultivated for a period of time to stabilize his foundation and strength. Although, after he finished his secluded cultivation, there was a small incident in the distorted spacetime. But when he released his divine senses, he found that the Nangong clan was surrounded by strong enemies, so he put that matter aside and came out of seclusion first. Originally, he wanted to attack directly and destroy Jin Shuang's army with the power to destroy them. But Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang dissuaded him and specially arranged such an entrance. Nangong Buhua told him that this was his first battle after returning to the God world, and it was very important. Not only did this battle have to be won beautifully, but it also had to be won easily and shockingly. After all, there were many forces watching in the dark, estimating his strength and thinking of how to bargain with him. Ji Tianxing did not mind following Nangong Buhua's advice and listened to it. Reality proved that such an appearance was indeed a pleasant surprise, and also left a deep impression on people. Jin Shuang, it has been many years since we last met. Do you have any last words? Ji Tianxing looked at Jin Shuang with a smile that was not a smile, and said these words calmly. It did not sound angry or murderous, as if he was saying goodbye to a passerby. Jin Shuang frowned fiercely, his eyes surging with anger. Although he was nervous, he was not afraid at all. With a dignified aura, he sneered and said, "Everyone knows that Kenshin's sword cultivation is unparalleled in the world, and his strength is incomparably strong. But you are heavily injured and you are alone. How are you going to defend against me and my 800 elite soldiers? Today, I will kill you and use you as a stepping stone to become famous." Chapter 4068. If Jin Shuang could really kill Kenshin, that would fulfill his wish. He could really soar to the heavens and become famous in the God realm. Moreover, the Azura God Emperor would definitely reward him heavily and treat him as the #1 meritorious official. As for Kenshin, he would be killed by Jin Shuang in his first battle after returning to the God realm. This was definitely more humiliating than death. His legend would be shattered, and he would become the laughingstock of the entire God realm. The two words, Kenshin, would also be quickly forgotten by the world. Even if people occasionally mentioned it, it would be the object of ridicule and ridicule. But all of these were hypotheses and what if. The reality was like this. Ji Tianxing chuckled and raised his right hand. Pinching his sword fingers, he pointed towards Jin Shuang's army. Xiao! Xiao Xiao! 3 consecutive golden sword lights pierced through the air like lightning. Everyone only caught a glimpse of them before they exploded in the crowd. The divine monarchs under Jin Shuang did not even have time to react, let alone dodge or block. Even the 42 divine monarchs only saw the sword lights appear and did not have time to react. Ji Tianxing only casually pointed and sent out 3 simple sword lights. However, they contained many profound meanings of the way of the sword. The seemingly simple golden sword lights that were only 300 meters long actually contained more than 200 types of law divine power. Moreover, they were extremely fast and contained sword intent that reached the heavens. This was the peak of the way of the sword in the world. Bang, bang, bang! Amidst the deafening sound, flesh and blood flew in the crowd and screams sounded everywhere. At least 80 divine monarchs were killed on the spot by the sword light. Their bodies turned into minced meat and blood splattered on the ruins. There were also 30 divine monarchs nearby who were lucky enough to keep their lives. However, they were also heavily injured by the sword intent and the shockwave. Covered in blood, they fell into the ruins and let out miserable cries. The crowd immediately exploded. Hundreds of divine monarchs let out terrified screams and roars as they scattered in all directions. The formation was instantly thrown into chaos. Even the 40 divine monarchs and 7 inspectors subconsciously moved to the sides, afraid of being affected. Jin Shuang still stood at the front of the crowd and did not dodge. However, his expression was extremely ugly, and his eyes were filled with shame, anger, and killing intent. Ji Tianxing did not refute his provocation. Instead, he used practical actions to give the best answer. Kenshin had casually pointed a finger and instantly killed nearly 100 divine lord masters. Was this seriously wounded? You, Jin Shuang, are merely an 8th-degree realm god king. How dare you clamor about killing Kenshin? How laughable! At this moment, everyone present seemed to have heard a resounding slap. But no matter how angry Jin Shuang was, no matter how much she feared Kenshin, it was impossible for her to escape without fighting. He glared angrily at Ji Tianxing and slowly raised his divine sword. The aura around his body rose crazily as the divine power in his body gathered violently. Everyone thought that he was seething with anger and was going to fight Kenshin himself. But to everyone's surprise, he waved his sword fiercely and roared, "Everyone, listen to my orders. Surround and kill Kenshin at all costs." When his voice fell, he took the lead and rushed out, leading all the soldiers under his command to kill Ji Tianxing with all their might. Obviously, Jin Shuang was not blinded by anger and still remained calm. He didn't forget that Sword God was Emperor God Xiao Luo's greatest enemy and the person he wanted to kill the most. As long as he could kill Kenshin, even if he and all his subordinates died here, it would be worth it. Kill Kenshin and make a name for yourself. Whoever can take Kenshin's head will definitely be rewarded with the greatest merit. Even if we die, we must drag Kenshin down with us. In the midst of the charge, several inspectors and many god kings shouted. They really did not care about anything else. Seeing such a scene, Nangong Nihuang, several elders, and many deacons' hearts were raised. There were even people who scolded Jin Shuang and the others. Damn it! They actually besieged Kenshin without caring about their lives. More than 800 people besieging Kenshin. Who can withstand this? Jin Shuang, this sinister old man, he is too despicable. Everyone, don't just stand there. Let's help Kenshin together. In the end, the elder's words were stuck in his throat before he could finish his sentence. Because, in the next moment, they saw what it meant to be invincible. Even in the face of the siege of Jin Shuang and more than 800 god kings and monarchs, Ji Tianxing was calm and composed, his expression calm. He did not take a step back, nor did he take out his divine sword or weapon. He just casually raised his palms and stabbed his 10 fingers straight at Jin Shuang's army. His slender and crystal-like fingers actually burst forth with hundreds of dazzling sword lights, carrying the power to destroy heaven and earth, interweaving a huge sword net in the sky. At the same time, dazzling golden light burst forth from his body, condensing into a huge wall of light behind him. At this moment, he was as dazzling as the sun, making it hard for people to look at him directly. The seemingly thin golden wall of light was like an indomitable wall between him and the Nangong clan members. Boom, 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 boom. The attacks of Jin Shuang and the 800 god kings and monarchs all hit the golden wall of light, creating a huge explosion that shook heaven and earth. However, the wall of golden light continued to tremble, but not a single crack appeared. Instead, the divine technique attacks of Jin Shuang and the others were all shattered and disintegrated on the spot. Immediately after, Ji Tianxing sent out hundreds of sword lights, forming a huge sword net that enveloped Jin Shuang's army. Xiao! Xiao xiao xiao! The sword lights were faster than the speed of light, flying through the sky, piercing through and killing one god monarch after another, god king after god king. Pu pu pu, sounds came one after another. It was the sound of the sword lights piercing through the bodies. Thousands of Nangong clan members saw Jin Shuang's 800 god kings and monarchs trembling in the sky as if they were dancing. Their foreheads, the back of their heads, their hearts and other vital parts were all pierced by the sword lights, bringing out streams of blood that fell from the sky. Every time someone's head was pierced by the sword light, their godhead would shatter and they would die on the spot, their corpse falling down powerlessly. However, the corpse would not fall into the ruins, it would be cut into pieces by the sword net, turning into drops of blood and debris that fell into the ruins. Other than the sound of the sword lights piercing through the air, there were only the screams of Jin Shuang's army, angry roars and the shocked cries of the Nangong clan members. Before this, no one would have thought that someone could be so powerful to be able to fight against 800 experts and experts by himself. No one had ever seen the way of the sword being used like this, to be able to kill enemies so pleasing to the eye. Ji Tianxing sent out hundreds of sword lights, as if they were alive and intelligent. Other than the sword lights, he did nothing else. He just put his hands behind his back and quietly watched Jin Shuang's army. After 100 breaths, the power of the hundreds of sword lights was used up and they finally disappeared. As for the 800 god monarchs under Jin Shuang, they were all killed. Of the 42 god kings, only 22 were left and they were all heavily injured. Chapter 4069. The entire place was silent. Everyone was stupefied. Thousands of Nangong clan members were shocked as they looked at the battlefield in disbelief. They looked at the miserable Jin Shuang and the others. As for Jin Shuang, the 7 inspectors and the 22 divine kings, they looked at the empty sky in a daze. There were more than 800 people just now, but now there were only 30 left. The Nangong clan members watched from the side and did not help at all. Ji Tianxing alone killed more than 800 people with one move. They could not believe that this was real. Jin Shuang and the 29 surviving divine kings finally realized what terror was. In their understanding, even if it was a peak divine king, they should not be powerful to such an extent either. This was simply unreasonable. Previously, Jin Shuang and the others thought that no matter how strong Kenshin was, he was alone. As long as they paid a heavy price, they would definitely be able to kill Kenshin. But now, it seemed that this was an unrealistic fantasy. Just Kenshin alone could kill all of them. Under such circumstances, if they did not escape, they would be completely wiped out. After Jin Shuang and the others regained their senses, they did not hesitate to turn around and escape towards the Grotto Heaven's exit. The plan to kill Kenshin had already failed. Through this operation, they also proved that Kenshin was not injured and was very powerful. They were satisfied with this result. The most important thing now was to save their lives. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! 35 colored streaks of light streaked across the sky and escaped as fast as lightning. Even those domain lords and divine kings, who were heavily injured and covered in blood, released their last bit of potential and raised their speed to the limit. However, when they saw the situation in front of them, their expressions changed drastically. They all revealed expressions of anger and despair. This was because in front of them, to their left and right and above their heads, there was a huge five-colored barrier. This was the useless barrier that Nangong Buhua and the other elders took out dozens of divine artifacts to form. Previously, Jin Shuang and the others were still laughing at Nangong Buhua. Were they scared silly and did not know what to do? They actually set up a barrier behind them that did not threaten them at all. Now, they finally understood the use of the barrier. It turned out that Nangong Buhua and the others had predicted this outcome when they first appeared. That was why they had set up a barrier in advance. That barrier was not used to deal with them, but to prevent them from escaping. This was too ironic. Jin Shuang and the others were incomparably humiliated, but compared to their lives, that bit of humiliation was nothing. Everyone, assist me and break through it. At such a critical moment, there was no room for hesitation. Even the slightest delay would cause the escape to fail. As a result, Jin Shuang made a prompt decision to gather everyone's strength at one point and break through the multicolored barrier. Swish! Swish! The 7 inspectors and the 22 God Kings reacted quickly and immediately gathered behind Jin Shuang, simultaneously releasing their God force into his body. Jin Shuang's godly power exploded. Her body swayed and her robes fluttered. She held the godly sword with both hands and stabbed at the five-colored barrier. He had gathered the power of 29 God Kings, and his battle prowess had increased by at least 5 times. As for the five-colored barrier, it was only a temporary defensive wall formed by Nangong Buhua and the others' divine artifacts. Its power would not be too strong. Seeing that Jin Shuang and the others were like a huge, sharp blade, fiercely stabbing towards the five-colored barrier. In the next moment, the five-colored barrier was about to be penetrated, or even collapse. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing calmly took a step forward and teleported in front of Jin Shuang and the others. Then, he turned to face Jin Shuang and the others and casually punched. The punch that seemed neither fast nor slow, and was calm and peaceful, contained 100% of his strength, 300 types of law God force, and a soul-stirring power. Kaboom! Following a deafening sound, a mountain-sized dragon-elephant fist fiercely smashed into Jin Shuang's sword. Although the dragon-elephant phantom was shattered, Jin Shuang's full-powered strike was also destroyed. The berserk godly power fiercely smashed into Jin Shuang and the others. Not only were more than 300 types of laws and divine powers blasted apart, but even the invisible power of the spirit had also exploded. Thousands of Nangong clansmen saw Jin Shuang and the other 29 God Kings fly out like broken sacks, tumbling hundreds of miles away. Especially Jin Shuang, who bore the brunt of the attack. His godly body could not withstand such power, and actually exploded on the spot, turning into a sky full of blood and debris. The few inspectors behind him, as well as a few heavily injured God Kings, were also killed on the spot. Not even their bones were left. Ji Tianxing's seemingly ordinary punch was actually able to defeat 30 God Kings, and instantly kill 8 of them. Such terrifying power was beyond everyone's imagination. Plop! Plop! A moment later, more than 20 God Kings who were lucky not to die fell into the ruins in disorder, and dust filled the sky. The few who were already killed had their godhead fragments scattered in the ruins. Jin Shuang's luck was not bad, only his godly body was destroyed, his godhead was still intact, and he was running around wildly. Front, back, left, and right were all blocked. It was either the five-colored barrier or the thousands of Nangong clansmen. He had nowhere to run. In a moment of desperation, his godhead could only drill into the ground, hoping to escape through the ground. But just as his godhead drilled into the ground, Ji Tianxing pointed a finger at the ground, and the power of tens of thousands of miles of earth gathered, turning into a sword light that soared into the sky. Gotcha! That earthen yellow sword light pierced Jin Shuang's godhead without any deviation. With a crisp shattering sound, Jin Shuang's godhead collapsed on the spot, and he died. The remaining 20 or so god-kings were all covered in blood, missing limbs, and miserably lying in the ruins. Even if they still had the strength to fly, they did not dare to act rashly, and also dispelled the thought of running away. Seeing Ji Tianqing walk over in the air, they were all scared out of their wits, and endured the humiliation as they knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. For a moment the place was filled with wails. Ji Tianqing frowned, ignored the 20 or so god-kings who were severely injured, and gave Nangong Buhua a look. Nangong Buhua immediately understood and immediately ordered the elders and deacons of the Nangong clan to go forward and capture the god-kings. Whoosh! Ji Tianqing flew across the sky, and under the respectful and admiring gazes of all the Nangong clan members, he flew toward the light palace on the main peak. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the others hurriedly followed and rushed toward the light palace. They knew that Kenshin would definitely give the order to start the operation. As for the elders and 20 deacons, they escorted the 20 or so god-kings who were captured to the Nangong clan's dungeon. The thousands of Nangong clan members came back to their senses and started to clean up the battlefield and the ruins. Chapter 40-70. Ji Tianqing did not have to worry about the aftermath. The Nangong clan would take care of it. Whether it was cleaning up the battlefield, rebuilding the palaces and residences, or imprisoning and interrogating the deity kings, the Nangong clan would take care of it. After an hour, the Yenshu heavenly abode regained its peace. Although there was still a huge gap in the defensive formation that needed to be fixed, there was no hurry. Nangong Buhua sat at the head of the table, with Nangong Nihuang beside him. Ji Tianqing sat on the left, while the elders sat on the right. It was a simple and straightforward meeting. The two elders reported the results of the battle. Master, Lord Kenshin, we won the battle, but more than 800 of our people were killed, and more than 300 were injured. We have arranged for them to be treated. Jin Shuang's army, except for the 3 deity warships that escaped, we killed 952 of them and captured 24 deity kings. The 24 of them were severely injured, including 13 region masters. They are currently locked up in our dungeon, guarded by 3 elders and 20 deacons. The interrogations are still ongoing, and we expect the results within a day. Although the Nangong clan had many casualties, it was nothing compared to the tens of thousands of Nangong clan members. Moreover, they had almost annihilated Jin Shuang's army and killed him. This was news that would shock the boundless heaven continent, no, the entire realm of the gods. Nangong Buhua nodded slightly, showing that he was satisfied with the results. He ordered, "Send people to fix the gap in the defensive formation immediately. Even if we have to mobilize the entire clan, we must fix it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the Yenshu heavenly abode will be open at any time, and it will not be safe. Also, the news of Jin Shuang's army being annihilated will spread quickly. Not only will many forces pay attention to it, but the imperial tutor, Meng Shuai, and Commander Qi Yan will also know. They will be furious. From now on, we must strengthen our patrols and security, in case the imperial tutor and Meng Shuai retaliates and seeks revenge." The several elders bowed in unison and said, "Yes, sir." Everyone's gaze fell on Ji Tianqing, waiting for him to speak. After all, he was the only one who had the right to decide what to do next. Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianqing said in a calm tone, "Today's battle will spread throughout the boundless heaven continent very soon. The major forces that have been watching us in the dark should know that it's time to make a choice. Nangong family head, I'll leave this matter to you. Inform all the family heads and family heads of the ancient clans as soon as possible and invite them to Yenshu Cave for a meeting. In addition to the forces loyal to the Azura God Emperor, there were more than a dozen top forces who were also invited. The time limit is 1 month. After that, I won't wait for you." Ji Tianqing was finally going to gather all the major factions and ancient clans to unite against the Azura God Emperor. However, Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and the other elders were stunned when they heard his words. Everyone was shocked and in disbelief. Nangong Buhua frowned and asked, Kenshin, are you sure you want to inform all the ancient clans and the top forces that are not loyal to the Shura God Emperor? Others did not know, but everyone present was well aware. Although 70 to 80% of the forces and clans wanted to rebel against the Ashura God Emperor's rule. However, there were very few clans and forces that were willing to support and follow Kenshin. Most of the ancient clans and top forces wanted to protect themselves and did not care about worldly affairs. Why would they come to Yenshu Cave for a meeting? If Ji Tianqing did this, not only would he not be able to gather a large number of allies and rebels, but it would also leak the information and reveal the timing of his action. However, Ji Tianqing seemed to have overlooked this point. He nodded without hesitation and said, "That's right." Nangong Buhua hesitated for a moment and said with a bitter smile, "But we all know that those guys have their own agendas and will not follow you openly." Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood and said, "You just need to send out a message and inform them. As for whether they come or not, that's their business." Seeing Ji Tianqing's firm attitude, Nangong Buhua and the rest guessed that he must have his own plans. Therefore, Nangong Buhua stopped persuading him and nodded to show that he understood. Next, Nangong Buhua and the other elders asked Ji Tianqing if he had any orders. What preparations did he need the Nangong clan to do? Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "The Nangong clan has already done what needs to be done. You can handle this matter." Nangong Buhua and the other elders felt that he was not that sad about this matter and did not feel nervous at all. They could not help but wonder. However, Ji Tianqing did not explain and they could not ask further. They could only suppress their doubts in their hearts. The meeting ended quickly. Ji Tianqing left the Divine Light Palace and returned to the secret room in his residence. He returned to the distorted spacetime. Only Nangong Buhua and the rest were left in the main hall. The elders looked at the clan leader and asked, "Clan leader, do we really not need to do anything else and only need to recuperate?" Nangong Buhua nodded and said, "Since Kenshin has no other orders, it means that he has a card up his sleeve. You don't have to worry and just focus on recuperating. Moreover, everyone has seen with their own eyes how terrifying Kenshin's strength is. I am sure that other than the 5 God Emperors, no one in this world is his match. So, what are you worried about?" Hearing that what he said made sense, everyone no longer hesitated and left the Divine Light Palace to carry out their task. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang were left in the main hall, and it immediately quieted down. Nangong Nihuang looked at her father and asked, "Father, what tasks do you have for me?" Nangong Buhua thought for a while and said, "There is nothing for you to do. If you have nothing to do, you can patrol Yenshu Cave and strengthen the defenses. Also, if you have nothing to do, you can spend more time with Long Tian to prevent him from inconveniencing himself." Nangong Nihuang heard and naturally understood what her father meant. Her eyes flashed with a tinge of shyness and she nodded and left. The people of the Nangong clan were still busy. Ji Tianqing had already returned to the distorted spacetime to settle the small matter that he had put aside previously. Although it was a small matter, it was actually not a small matter. After all, this matter was discovered by the Blood Illusion God, and it was related to the Blood Flame Sacred Tree. Many years ago, the Blood Illusion God did not have a body. It was Ji Tianqing who used a branch of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree to refine his body. From then on, the Blood Illusion God of the God Lord realm possessed the body of a God King and shone with the second glory of his life. Now that he had already broken through to the God King level, his title was changed to the Blood Illusion God King. Previously in the battle on the Heavenly Policy Star, the Blood Illusion God King fought bravely and was severely injured. He was on the verge of death and almost lost his life. At the critical moment, fortunately, Jiku and the Sword of Burial of Heaven saved his life and saved his life. He originally thought that even if he returned to the distorted spacetime, he would need to recuperate for a few hundred years to recover. Who would have thought? Chapter 4071. A few months had passed in the outside world, but the blood fantasy deity king had only been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 20 years. He did not expect that his injuries had already recovered by 70 to 80%. He was no longer in danger. Such an exaggerated recovery speed made the blood fantasy deity king feel incredulous. When Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu and the rest found out, they exclaimed in amazement and asked the blood fantasy deity king how he did it. The blood fantasy deity king carefully recalled and racked his brains, but he could not find the reason. In the end, he briefly explained the process of treating his injuries to everyone. Back then, he was seriously injured and on the verge of death. He was in a semi-conscious and semi-conscious state when he returned to the distorted spacetime in a daze. His body was on the verge of shattering. He fell on the platform under the sacred tree and fell into a coma. His injuries were very serious. Not only was his body on the verge of collapse, his soul was also seriously injured and on the verge of collapse. But after a few years of deep sleep, he actually woke up. Then, he found that his injuries had healed and almost recovered by half. Even the injuries to his soul had unknowingly healed by half. Then, he could still feel that the blood flame sacred tree was continuously injecting energy into him to help him heal his injuries. Just like that, his injuries were mostly healed in just 20 years. This clearly proved that his miraculous recovery was due to the blood flame sacred tree. Chao Qingyu, Lin Shui and the rest also expressed their belief and agreement with this answer. After all, for so many years, they had also received immeasurable benefits from the blood flame sacred tree. But they only absorbed the power of the blood flame sacred tree. Every time their souls were injured, they did not feel that the sacred tree was helping them heal. Therefore, this discovery attracted everyone's attention. At that time, Ji Tianxing had just finished his seclusion. After knowing about this, he wanted to study it. He did not expect that Jin Shuang's army had already broken through Yenshu's grotto heaven and was about to reach the Great Hall of Light. Therefore, Ji Tianxing could only go and deal with Jin Shuang's army first and put this matter aside. Now, he returned to the blood flame sacred tree. Lin Shui, the blood fantasy deity king, Chao Qingyu and the rest were still waiting for him. Seeing that he had arrived, everyone quickly gathered around him and excitedly told him about a new discovery. "Young master, we've made a new discovery through comparison and research." Ji Tianxing's interest was piqued. He quickly asked, "What did you find?" Shui Lin was full of excitement and said with bright eyes, "Before, we could only absorb the power of the blood-fire sacred tree, but our souls didn't benefit. However, Shui Huan was different. His body was a branch of the blood flame sacred tree, and his soul had somehow formed a connection with the blood flame sacred tree. This is the reason why the blood flame sacred tree can heal him but not us." Chao Qingyu and Yank nodded in agreement. The Blood Illusion God King also smiled and said, "Young master, I can indeed feel that my soul has some sort of connection with the blood flame sacred tree. I can always feel that a trace of my soul has merged with the sacred tree. Even when I was heavily injured and on the verge of death, I didn't feel fear because I didn't feel that death was coming. I even have the illusion that even if I die, my consciousness and soul can be reborn from the blood flame sacred tree." At this point, the Blood Illusion God King scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "Maybe what I said sounds a little exaggerated and bizarre, but I guarantee that it's true." Ji Tianxing patted him on the shoulder and gave him an encouraging look. He said, "Don't worry, we've seen things even more exaggerated and bizarre than this. We believe in you." Shui Lin, Chao Qingyu and the rest also nodded in agreement. Originally, the Blood Illusion God King was still feeling uneasy, but seeing everyone's reaction, he immediately felt relieved. Next, everyone looked at Ji Tianxing and asked him what he thought. Ji Tianxing raised his head and looked at the blood flame sacred tree. He smiled and said, "When I first obtained this blood flame sacred tree, it was only a monarch level tree. After so many years of nurturing, it actually grew to a superior king-level tree. It's really unbelievable. In all the 3,000 worlds, this tree should be the world's #1 sacred tree. Since a trace of blood illusion's soul could merge with the blood flame sacred tree, it would provide him with a layer of protection and also give him an extra life. Then I have a bold idea. Maybe we can merge a trace of our souls into the blood flame sacred tree. No matter what dangers we encounter in the future, no matter how serious the injuries we receive, as long as the blood flame sacred tree doesn't perish, we will have an extra life and a chance of revival. Hearing his suggestion, everyone's blood boiled and they were filled with excitement and anticipation. Yes, this suggestion is great. Ha ha ha. I had the same idea just now. I have the same idea as the Lord. This is a superior king-level sacred tree. It should be one of the most difficult things to destroy in the world, right? If we merge a trace of our souls into it, it will be foolproof. We won't die no matter how injured we are. This idea is great. But we still have to think about how to implement it. Everyone was very interested in this suggestion and could not wait to study it. Ji Tianqing was the first to try. He released his divine sense to communicate with the blood flame sacred tree and tried to use his divine sense to connect with it. Logically speaking, the blood flame sacred tree was his and he had nurtured it for so many years. As the owner of the blood flame sacred tree, he should be able to communicate with the sacred tree and merge his divine sense with it. But in reality, things were not that simple. The blood flame sacred tree was not a living thing, and it had not gained sentience. Divine sense could not enter it and merge with it. Everyone had to think of a reasonable way to merge their divine sense into the sacred tree. Lin Shui proposed the first suggestion. Everyone should eat a divine fruit from the blood flame sacred tree and use the fruit's power to strengthen their connection with the sacred tree. This idea sounded feasible, so everyone started to try it out. After each of them consumed a divine fruit, they did indeed receive great benefits. Their divine power increased slightly. But when they tried to merge their divine sense with the blood flame sacred tree, there was still no reaction. Chao Qingyu proposed the second suggestion. Everyone's divine sense directly merged with the sacred tree. It did not seem realistic. Why not focus on one branch and use their divine sense to nourish and refine it? This might work. This suggestion was very reliable and sounded very feasible. So everyone started to try again. Half a month later, everyone used their divine sense to nourish the target branch until it glowed. But they still could not merge their divine sense. This suggestion was a failure. Then, Ji Tianqing proposed two very important issues. First, everyone had to find a way to strengthen their connection with the blood flame sacred tree. Secondly, they had to separate a wisp of their spiritual energy and separate it from their own. Only then would they be able to merge with the bloody fire sacred tree. Chapter 4072. The two questions that Ji Tianqing raised were indeed very important. Everyone knew that it made sense, but they all fell into hesitation. The first question was easy to answer, but the second question was the key. The souls of everyone present were complete, and the soul was a very mysterious and complicated thing. Rashly cutting off a strand of the soul would definitely cause great harm to the body, and there might even be unforeseen dangers. For example, it would affect the soul, consciousness, and thinking, lose some memories or abilities, and even affect the foundation of the divine path and the realm of strength. All the above dangers were very likely to happen, and no one dared to be careless. Thus, everyone fell silent and regained their composure. Ji Tianqing looked around and said with a smile, "Let me try first." Just as he finished speaking, the blood fantasy god king hurriedly stopped him. "Young master, you must not. You are carrying out a very important plan now, and there must not be any mistakes. Let me do it." Lin Shui quietly tugged at the blood fantasy god king's sleeve and reminded him softly, "You have already fused a strand of your soul with the sacred tree. How can you still try?" The The blood fantasy god king scratched his head awkwardly and could only step back. Then, Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu, and Yank stepped forward at the same time and said firmly, "Let me do it." Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon Right also came over and said hot-bloodedly, "Let me do it." Ji Tianqing looked at the two of them and persuaded, "It was not easy for the two of you to break through to the Divine King realm, and now you have not even stabilized your realms, so don't come and join in the fun." Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon Right were persuaded to go back, but Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu, and Yank still insisted. However, Ji Tianqing stopped the three of them and said earnestly, "This blood flame sacred tree was raised by me, and I am its master, so I know it best. Moreover, I have the most experience in cultivating the divine path, so of course, I will try first. After I succeed, I will teach you how to do it. Even if I don't succeed, at least I will not let myself be hurt. Don't worry, my control of the soul is meticulous, nothing will happen." No one could dissuade him, so they could only agree to let him try. Of course, everyone knew that he was protecting them, and their hearts were filled with gratitude. Not long after, Ji Tianqing began to cast a spell, carefully dividing the soul. Everyone sat around him, wholeheartedly protecting him. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone make the slightest sound for fear of disturbing him. Even though severing a strand of soul was an extremely dangerous, complicated, and troublesome matter, it was still not enough. However, Ji Tianqing's control over his soul was indeed extraordinarily meticulous. 10 days passed quietly. He successfully separated a wisp of his soul and condensed it into a ball of white light in front of him. The divine soul that looked like a white mist was only the size of a walnut, but it contained pure divine soul power, consciousness, and memories. However, after it left Ji Tianqing's body, it couldn't stay in the distorted space for too long. It had to attach itself to something. Moreover, Ji Tianqing had just separated a wisp of his soul, so it still affected his body and made him weaker than before. However, he didn't care about recuperating and adjusting his breath. He hurriedly used his divine soul power to nourish a branch of the blood flame sacred tree, and began to try to merge it. The platform was silent, and time passed quietly. Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu, and the rest remained silent. They stared at Ji Tianqing attentively, observing how he would cast the spell. Everyone's hearts were also in their mouths, and they were worried and anxious for Ji Tianqing. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing's casting process was very stable, and there were no abnormalities. His expression was also very calm, and his divine soul were in a normal state. Day after day passed, and everyone's anxious hearts gradually relaxed. Another 10 days later, above everyone's head, the branch that was about 1 meter long gradually changed from a purplish-red color to a layer of light gold. Seeing this special change, everyone was excited and full of excitement and anticipation. After waiting for another 3 days, Ji Tianqing finally finished casting the spell and opened his eyes. Everyone hurriedly surrounded him and asked about his well-being and how he was doing. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "I've made you worry. The process was very smooth and I succeeded. Now I also have a wisp of my divine soul attached to this blood flame sacred tree, which is equivalent to having another life-saving talisman." When everyone heard this, they immediately cheered excitedly. "Wow, that's great! You finally succeeded, my lord is really amazing! That's great!" After cheering, everyone looked at Ji Tianqing and listened to him explain the process of casting the spell, the things to pay attention to, and his summary of his experience. He spoke carefully one by one, so that everyone could understand clearly and not miss anything. After all, this matter was very important to everyone, and there was no room for mistakes. Half a day later, Ji Tianqing imparted his experience to everyone and answered all their questions. Then, Lin Shui volunteered to be the first to try. Ji Tianqing, Chao Qingyu, and the others all expressed their encouragement and support for her bravery. Thus, Lin Shui began to follow Ji Tianxing's instructions and cut her divine soul to fuse with the sacred tree. Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and the others helped to protect her and keep an eye on her situation. The process did not need to be described in detail. Although there was a small incident, under Ji Tianxing's protection, it could be considered a daunting experience without any mishap. After more than 20 days, Lin Shui's wisp of divine soul successfully fused with a branch of the blood flame sacred tree. The purple-black branch was also covered with a layer of white fluorescence that flowed slowly, and it was very special. Lin Shui succeeded. Next, Chao Qingyu, Yang, Lan and the others all tried one by one under Ji Tianxing's guidance. Chao Qingyu took 22 days to successfully fuse a wisp of divine soul into the sacred tree. Lan took 24 days to complete, while Yang only took 18 days. This did not mean that Yang was more talented and stronger than the couple, but that Yang's thinking was simpler and more direct. After they all succeeded, Gold Left Emissary and Blood Dragon Right Emissary, who had been cultivating for a few months, also rushed over to join in the fun. Thus, everyone imparted their experience and tricks to them and protected them together, allowing them to successfully fuse a wisp of divine soul. Unknowingly, half a year passed. Yun Yao and Ji Wushuang finished cultivating and woke up. Seeing that everyone was gathered under the blood flame sacred tree and seemed to be studying something, the mother and daughter flew over. Everyone greeted and exchanged greetings. After that, Yun Yao asked Ji Tianxing what had happened. Ji Tianxing told Yun Yao the whole story. After hearing this, Yun Yao smiled and said with worry and some reproach, "You're too mischievous. You've already fused with the Five Elements world. As long as the Five Elements world is not destroyed, you won't die. It's enough to have the Five Elements world to protect your life. Why did you risk splitting your divine soul and fusing it with this sacred tree? What if something went wrong when you split your divine soul?" Halfway through her words, she suddenly understood Ji Tianxing's good intentions and stopped the topic. "Sai, I know you're doing this for everyone's sake. You're trying to find a way to save everyone's lives." Chapter 4073. Yun Yao understood one thing a long time ago. The reason why Ji Tianxing was more popular and loved than other experts was because he treated people with sincerity. Other experts treated their followers as loyal subordinates and as sharp blades in their hands. However, Ji Tianxing was different. He treated the people who followed him as his friends. If there were benefits, he would never treat his friends unfairly. If there was danger, he would always face it himself and do his best to protect everyone. Who would not respect and support such an expert? It was because of this that everyone knew that his revenge plan was to fight against the 5 god emperors, but they still followed him wholeheartedly and helped him. Even Yang and Baifeng, who were defeated by him and forcibly taken in as god kings, would follow him loyally after interacting with him for a long time. It was basically impossible for this to happen to other powerhouses. Therefore, Yun Yao could understand and support Ji Tianxing taking the risk to seek a way to save everyone's lives. As for Ji Tianxing, when he heard his wife's slightly reproachful words, he knew that Yun Yao was worried about him. Therefore, he held her hand and comforted her with a smile. "Yao Yao, don't worry. Since I'm doing this, I'm definitely prepared and confident. Although the process is a little dangerous, I think it's worth it to give everyone another way to save their lives. Since you and Wushuang are here, I'll pass on the method and experience to you. You can also split a strand of your divine soul and merge it into the blood flame sacred tree." Yun Yao shook her head lightly and said gently, "To me, Wushuang, Wuhan and Cuckoo, our strongest backing and life-saving trump card is actually you. As long as you live, we won't die. And if you're not here one day, we won't be alive either." Although Ji Tianxing was very touched, he still wanted to refute this statement. "Yao Yao, this is unfair to the children. Cuckoo, we can live and die together. But the children are still young and have their own lives. Even if we're not here one day, they should live well. Otherwise, who will inherit our wishes and avenge us? Yun Yao was a little shaken. She nodded and said, "All right, my idea is indeed a little selfish. I didn't think it through enough. Then let's give it a try." Thus, Ji Tianxing personally imparted his experience to Yun Yao and Ji Wushuang, teaching them how to cast spells. Both mother and daughter were very intelligent. Ji Tianxing only needed to explain it once before they learned it. Next, Yun Yao cast a spell and tried to fuse them. Half a month later, she separated a wisp of her divine soul and successfully merged it into the blood flame sacred tree. Ji Wushuang cast the spell again, and only used half a month to succeed. Ji Tianxing originally wanted Ji Ku and Ji Wuhan to split a wisp of their divine souls and fuse it with the blood flame sacred tree. However, the two of them were still cultivating in seclusion and shouldn't be disturbed, so this matter could only be postponed. Ji Tianxing still had things to deal with, so he left this matter to Yun Yao and Ji Wushuang. After Ji Ku and Ji Wuhan finished cultivating, the two of them would impart the method and experience to help them complete it. Ji Tianxing left the distorted space-time and returned to the secret chamber. He had stayed in the distorted space-time for nearly a year, and 7 days had passed in the outside world. Nangong Buhua had sent messages to the various clans and factions. Now that 7 days had passed, the various factions had thought it through and replied. At this moment, Nangong Buhua personally came to the door of the secret chamber and knocked on the door to call Ji Tianxing to report the situation. Ji Tianxing opened the door of the secret chamber and saw Nangong Buhua standing outside, waiting patiently. Although Nangong Buhua looked calm, Ji Tianxing discovered that there was a hint of anger hidden in his eyes. It was conceivable that the various factions' replies were probably not satisfactory. Young Master Long, seeing Ji Tianxing come out, Nangong Buhua cupped his hands and bowed. He couldn't help but want to say the result. Ji Tianxing raised his hand to stop him and walked out first. "Don't be anxious. Let's talk slowly in the study." Nangong Buhua nodded and followed him to the study. After a while, the two of them entered the study, closed the door, and activated the defensive array formation. There was a large number of guards outside the study, and only the two of them were in the study, so they weren't afraid of being eavesdropped on. Ji Tianxing sat on the main seat, and Nangong Buhua sat opposite him. He said with an angry tone, "Young master, I sent messages to 17 ancient clans and 36 top factions. Only 4 ancient clans clearly said that they would come to see you as soon as possible to discuss the alliance. The other 13 clans and more than 20 forces were all vague and ambiguous. Their words were full of perfunctory intent. What's more infuriating is that more than a dozen factions were sarcastic toward us. There were even some who firmly supported the Shura God Emperor and wanted to take my message jade slip to inform the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor." When he spoke of those factions, Nangong Buhua couldn't hide his anger and almost had a murderous intent. He spoke in a gentle manner, but it was conceivable that the replies of those factions would be very infuriating. It was far beyond his description, and all of this was within Ji Tianxing's expectations, so he wasn't angry. "Well, tell me about the situation of those factions." Nangong Buhua snorted and said in a contemptuous tone, "The leaders of those factions are all snobbish and spineless. Many years ago, they had been scheming to curry favor with the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor, and wanted to join the Shura God Emperor. However, the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor didn't like them and ignored them. Now, they are using my message to ask for credit from the Meng Shuai and the Imperial Tutor. Perhaps they will get what they want." "I see." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, "Everyone has their own ambitions. If they want to join the strong and gain benefits, then let them be. However, you must remember all of them, because we're going to meet them soon. At that time, none of them can be left out." Although his voice and tone were calm, Nangong Buhua could still hear the murderous intent. Previously, he was worried that even if Ji Tianxing defeated those factions, He would consider the big picture and take them as his subordinate. If that was the case, he and the Nangong clan would have to work with those fence-sitters. Just thinking about it made him feel disgusted. Now, with Ji Tianxing's words, he was relieved. At least, when the two sides fought, he wouldn't forget to deal with those factions. Just as Nangong Buhuo was making up his mind, Ji Tianxing asked again, "Who are the 4 ancient clans that are rushing here as soon as possible?" At the mention of these 4 ancient clans, Nangong Buhuo's mood improved. He replied with a smile, "Naturally, they are the clans that have received your favor and supported you the most. There is the War God clan from the Fighting Grotto Heaven, the Lan clan from the Azure Grotto Heaven, the Phoenix clan from the Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, and the Jiang clan from the Divine Attraction Grotto Heaven." Hearing the names of these 4 clans, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "As expected, a friend in need is a friend indeed."